Well, hello, everyone. Happy early stream. And my streaming schedule today was dictated largely based on a poll I put on Twitter, where I asked, do you want me to cover this sham impeachment, not even impeachment, might as well be impeachment, I suppose, this sham propaganda hearing live as it happens for day 3 of nonsense show trial hearing whatever propaganda put out by Liz Cheney and her band of merry men. It's scheduled to start pretty soon, and I put a poll on Twitter saying, do you want me to watch it live or would you prefer I wait? And people said live, and so here we go. It looks like they are getting started. Now, I just want to remind everyone before we turn on the audio, I've got if you want to support the work I'm doing and help keep this channel going, please consider becoming a member of my locals community. You can do that for $5 a month. You can do it for $50 a year. You can even make a one-time gift. You get lots of perks and all sorts of awesome stuff. The other thing I want to tell you is that good news, the audio version of my book, Actively Unwoke, is back. You can buy the audio version as of today. You can see audio is back. You can buy it on Amazon. You can buy it on Audible. I read it myself this time to prevent any further quality control issues as a result of a woke leftist accidentally reading my audiobook. So it is read by me, the author, and you can get your copy now on Audible, Amazon, and all that stuff. And this is not the last stream I'll be doing today. It is but the first stream I'll be doing today. I will be going live at 5 p.m. for a scheduled live stream with my friend Andrew Gold, and we're going to talk about authenticity, shame, secrets, and can we just be ourselves and have an authentic human experience? That is coming live to you at 5 p.m. But our show trial is getting started. So let's turn on the sound and let's see what's happening. I'm impressed with them for starting on time. Guys, let me know if the sound is okay. No sound? Okay, hang on. Let me do it again. You haven't missed anything. Don't worry about it. Sound coming through now?
Office that
Is
he
sound
did not
good now?
win.
Let me know.
Today, the Select Committee is going to reveal the details of that pressure campaign.
I know I have to wait a second.
What does the Vice President of the United States even have to do with a presidential election?
Good now? Okay. Sorry, guys. This is what happens when we do this on the fly.
Vice President of
we
the
made
United
it.
States
He hasn't said anything interesting yet.
oversees the process
He's like,
of
Mike
counting
Pence.
the
We're going to talk about
Electoral
Mike
College
Pence.
votes.
All right.
A process
Let's talk about
that
Pence.
took place on January 6, 2021. Donald Trump wanted Mike Pence to do something no other vice president has ever done. The former president wanted Pence to reject the votes and either declare Trump the winner or send the votes back to the states to be counted again. Mike Pence said no. He resisted the pressure. He knew it was
Mike
illegal.
Pence is establishment shill.
We're
now, I don't actually
fortunate
think
for
Mike
Mr.
Pence
Pence's
should have done
courage
what Trump wanted him to do.
on
To be clear,
January
I
6th.
wanted the evidence to be
Our
presented through the
democracy came
objections. I don't
dangerously
think
close
that Mike
to
Pence actually should have done this. I think that would have
That
been
courage put him
really, really
in
bad.
tremendous danger.
But Mike
When
Pence is still a shill
made it clear
and should never be
that he
trusted
wouldn't
again.
give in to Donald Trump's scheme, Donald Trump turned the mob on him. A mob that was chanting, "Hang Mike Pence."
Like 3 people were chanting that, and they shouldn't have been chanting that. That was not. He's trying to make it seem like every single person there was chanting that. That is not true. That is a lie. It was like 3 people that shouldn't have been chanting it. Probably QAnon people who are nuts.
Hasn't receded. Led by my colleague, Mr. Aguilar, today we'll lay out the facts for the American people. But first, I'll recognize my colleague from Wyoming, Ms. Cheney, for any opening
the
statement.
The outgoing Congresswoman from Wyoming,
Thank you
Liz.
very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me take just a few minutes today to put the topic of our hearing in broader context. In our last hearing, we heard unequivocal testimony that President Trump was told his election fraud allegations were complete nonsense. We heard this from members of the Trump campaign. We heard this from President Trump's campaign lawyers. We heard this from President Trump's former Attorney General, Bill Barr. We heard this from President Trump's former acting Attorney General, Jeff Rosen. And we heard this from President Trump's former acting Deputy Attorney General, Richard Donahue. We heard from members of President Trump's White House staff as well. Today, we're focusing on President Trump's relentless effort to pressure Mike Pence to refuse to count electoral votes on January 6th. Here again is how the former vice president phrased it in a speech before the Federalist Society, a group of conservative lawyers.
This week, that President Trump said I had the right to overturn the election. But President Trump is wrong. I had no right to overturn the election. The presidency belongs to the American people and the American people alone. And frankly, there is no idea more un-American than the notion that any one person could choose the American president.
What the president wanted the vice president to do was not just wrong, it was illegal and unconstitutional. We will hear many details in today's hearing, but please consider
Karlyn
these 2
on.
points.
That's what we're going to call my
First,
cult.
President Trump was told repeatedly that Mike Pence lacked the constitutional and legal authority to do what President Trump was demanding he do. This is testimony from Mark Short, the vice president's chief of staff, who served in the Trump administration in multiple positions over 4 years.
But just to pick up on that, Mr. Short, was it your impression that the vice president had directly conveyed his position on these issues to the president, not just to the world through a dear colleague letter, but directly to President Trump?
Many times.
And had been consistent in conveying his position to the president?
Very consistent.
Okay.
But President Trump plotted with a lawyer named John Eastman to pressure Pence to do so anyway. As the federal court has explained, quote, based on the evidence, the court finds that it is more likely than not that President Trump and Dr. Eastman dishonestly conspired to obstruct the joint session of Congress
Then you need
on January
to
6th,
charge him with a
2021.
crime. They're not going to charge
What
Trump with a crime out of
exactly
any of
did
this. They've already
President
said
Trump
that. They've
know?
literally already
When
announced that Trump is
exactly
getting
did
charged with
President
nothing.
Trump know that it
If
would
he
be
did
illegal
something
for Mike
wrong,
Pence to
charge him with a
refuse to count
crime. You
electoral
can't
votes?
prove he did something wrong,
Here is
which
one
is why you're
sample
not
of
charging him with a
testimony
crime.
given by one of the witnesses before us today, the Vice President's General Counsel.
Did John Eastman ever admit, as far as you know, in front of the president, that his proposal would violate the Electoral Count Act?
I believe he did on the 4th.
It was January 4th, 2 days before the attack on Congress. A second point, please listen to testimony today about all of the ways that President Trump attempted to pressure Vice President Pence, including Donald Trump's tweet at 2:24 p.m. condemning Vice President Mike Pence when President Trump already knew a violent riot was underway at the Capitol. In future hearings, you will hear from witnesses who were present inside the White House, who were present inside the West Wing on that day. But today we focus on the earnest efforts of Mike Pence, who was determined to abide by his oath of office. As Vice President Pence prepared a statement on January 5th and 6th, explaining that he could not illegally refuse to count electoral votes, he said this to his staff.
I mean, the vice president had said, this may be the most important thing I ever say. And so
This meaning the statement.
the statement. And he really wanted to make sure that it was just so.
You will hear today that President Trump's White House counsel believed that the vice president did exactly the right thing on January 6th, as did others in the White House, as did Fox News host Sean
Trump
Hannity.
is actually allowed to have
Vice
a difference of
President Pence
opinion.
understood that his oath
He's
of
allowed to have a
office
difference of
was more
opinion. And again, I
important than
say
his
that as
loyalty
someone
to
who
Donald Trump.
I don't think Mike
He
Pence
did
should
his
have
duty.
done anything. Like I think
President
Mike Pence
Trump
did exactly what he probably
unequivocally
should have done that
did
day.
not.
If
Thank you,
for
Mr.
no other
Chairman.
reason than to
I yield
protect
back.
his own ass. Mike Pence, make
Without
no
objection,
mistake,
I
Mike
recognize the
Pence was
gentleman
covering
from
his own
California,
ass that day.
Mr.
That was
Aguilar,
all he
for an
was
opening
doing.
statement.
Let's just be very clear. He was covering his own ass.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today, we intend to show the American people that January 6th was not an
Look
isolated
how
incident.
he's looking right into the camera.
In the
He
weeks
knows
culminating
exactly who he's talking
before,
to,
it
looking
was a legal
directly into
scheme
that camera.
and deception. We've already learned that President Trump knew he lost the 2020 election.
Then he
Shortly
looks down
after,
for the
he began to
teleprompter.
look
Then he
for a
looks
way
back
to
up again. Watch
circumvent
his
our
eyes.
country's most fundamental
Looks up into the
civic
camera.
tradition,
At
peaceful
teleprompter.
transfer of power.
Teleprompter.
The president latched on to a dangerous theory
Teleprompter.
and would not let go because he was convinced it would keep him in
Camera.
office. We witnessed firsthand what happened when the President of the United States weaponized this theory. The Capitol was overrun, police officers lost their lives, and the Vice President was taken to a secure location because his safety was in jeopardy. Let's take a look at the effect of Donald Trump's words and actions.
Sam says, what would happen if randos claimed to be electors? I don't know the answer to that, Sam. Probably nothing, because they're random people. Like, they're not allowed to express an opinion either. Like,
that will be a sad day for our country. And Mike Pence, I hope you're going to stand up for the good of our Constitution and for the good of our country. And if you're not, I'm going to be very disappointed in you. I will tell you right now.
I'm telling you what, I'm hearing the Pence just caved. No. Is that true? I'm hearing reports that Pence caved. No, I'm telling you, if Pence caved, we're gonna drag motherfuckers through the streets. You fucking politicians
idiot.
are gonna get
Fucking
fucking drugged
idiot.
through the streets. Yeah.
I guess
you guys wonder why I get pissed off at conservatives? Right there.
Decide
Unnecessary.
to do the right thing, according to Trump.
Unnecessary. They're such fucking LARPers. Conservatives are the biggest LARPers in the world. Yeah, that's like not even that many people. I'm sorry. There are hundreds of people in there. Yeah, that was definitely a serious thing. That was stupid. That shouldn't have happened. Again, conservatives are LARPing morons sometimes. Not all of them, but you guys know exactly who I'm talking about. That was stupid.
Led a violent attack on the Capitol.
Probably a Fed, though, that put that news up, if we're honest about it. Like, it was probably a Fed.
You'll hear from witnesses that Donald Trump pressured Mike Pence to adopt a legally and morally bankrupt idea that the vice president could choose who the next president can be. You'll hear about how the vice president, the White House counsel, and others told Donald Trump that the vice president had no such authority. But President Trump would not listen. You'll hear how Vice President Pence withstood an onslaught of pressure from President Trump, both publicly and privately. A pressure campaign that built to a fever pitch with a heated phone call on January 6th.
Well, it's because I'm having my coffee
You'll
right
also
now.
hear
I might actually have to
knew there was
exit to go back downstairs to refill my giant mug.
Did not have
it's like
the,
as
quote,
big as
courage
half of my
to
head.
do what needed to be done. Let me be clear. Vice President Pence did the right thing that day. He stayed true to his oath to protect and defend the Constitution.
Because Mike Pence covered his ass that day and didn't play ball with Trump, he's being welcomed in and embraced.
Thank you, Mr. Aguilar.
By the propaganda
We're honored
establishment
to have
machine.
two distinguished witnesses who advised Vice President regarding his role on January 6th. Judge J. Michael Ludick is one of the leading conservative legal thinkers in the country. He served in administrations of President Ronald Reagan and George
here's what their testimony is going to be. They're going to be like, yes, Mike Pence is an honorable man who did the right thing in the face of insurmountable pressure. Mike Pence is our hero. That's basically what their testimony is going to be.
Critical advice for Vice President Pence
I really don't think I'm wrong.
regarding the role of the Vice President in the joint session of Congress shortly before that fateful moment. He's written that the Vice President does not have the power to select the next president of the United States. He's also written that contrary theory espoused by one of his own former law clerks was, quote, incorrect at every turn.
And I still
We
feel
also
like I'm
joined
owed
today by
like
one of the
an I told
people
you so for
who
all
was
the
with
times that
Vice
I said, I don't
President
like Mike
Pence
Pence,
on
I don't like
January
Mike Pence, I don't like, and
6th.
conservatives like, Karlyn,
Greg Jacob
you are still a
was
leftist.
counsel
How
to
can you
Vice
possibly
President
not like Mike
Pence.
Pence?
He
You are
conducted a
obviously
thorough
still a
analysis
Democrat
of the
trying
role
to
of the
fool
Vice
us. That
President
happened
in the
over
joint
and over and
session
over and over and
of
over
Congress
again.
under the
Over and
Constitution,
over and over again in
the Electoral
2020.
Count Act, and
I still feel
230
like I'm owed an I
years
told you so that I have not
historical
collected on.
practice. But he also has firsthand information
Conservatives
about
don't
the attack
fucking
on
listen.
the Capitol
This is why they
because
lose.
he
They don't
lived
listen.
through it. He was with the Vice President, and his own life was in danger. I will now swear in our witnesses. The witnesses will please stand and raise their right hand. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
It doesn't matter
So
if he
help
was a
you
better
God.
VP than Harris. A fucking stuffed animal
you.
could be a
May
better
proceed.
VP than Harris. It doesn't matter. That's not the point. Mike Pence never should have been trusted,
Let
and
the
I tried
record
to warn all
reflect
of
the
you, and no
witnesses
one listened.
answered in the
And I was called a
affirmative.
leftist for warning you.
I now recognize myself for questions. In the United States,
I appreciate you, Phil,
the people
but
choose our representatives, including the highest official in the land, the President of the United States. The American people did this on November 3rd,
thank you,
2020.
Scott. I appreciate
But
that.
President Trump did not
What a
like
nice thing to
the
say.
outcome. He did everything he could to change the result of the election. He tried litigation, 62 cases, in fact, and that failed. He tried to pressure state
Yeah.
legislatures.
Sam says Trump
to
didn't ask
reverse
Pence
the
to select him. He
results
wanted
of the
Pence to
election
kick back
in
to
their
the
states.
electors, to the states, to
They
select one slate
refused.
for each
He
after
tried to
recounts and
enlist the
lawsuits.
Department of Justice in
I
its
know it's
efforts to
and
overturn
I'm going to
election
be honest, Sam.
results.
I don't think that should have
But
happened. I
officials
don't.
leading the
I think that they had their
department
chance to fight it and they
refused to
lost.
comply.
But we can disagree on this. But I do
So
agree with what
eventually,
you're
he
saying.
latched on to a completely
Yeah, another Karlyn was
nonsensical
right.
and
Tip jar.
anti-democratic
Exactly.
theory that one man,
I have a whole
his
jar of
own vice
nickels right
president,
now
could
in my
determine
head.
the outcome
Anyway,
of the election. He wanted the vice president to unilaterally select the president. This theory that the vice president could unilaterally select the president runs completely
that wasn't what the
contrary to
theory
our
was.
Constitution, our laws, and the
That wasn't what they were talking
entirety
about doing
of our American experience.
at all.
But that didn't stop.
As Sam
That
pointed
didn't matter
out
to
correctly,
President Trump.
he was
I would
asking
now
Pence
like
to
to
kick it back to
explore
the states
how President Trump
to
came to
decide
latch
which
on
slate
to
of
this
electors was the
ridiculous
valid
legal
slate.
theory that the
He was
vice
not selecting the
president
president.
can select the president
This
of
is
the
a
United
lie.
States.
This is propaganda.
Mr. Jacob,
And they know they can get away with
how
this
did this
because
theory
no one
first
knows what the
come to your
Constitution
attention?
says.
The first time that I had a conversation with the vice president about the 12th Amendment and the Electoral Count Act was in early
I wasn't the
December,
only one who knew,
around
but
December
like
7th.
I was certainly called a leftist
The
every
vice
time I
president
said it.
called me over to his West Wing office and told me that he had been
Thank you,
seeing and reading
Sin.
things
I
that
appreciate
suggested
that.
he had a
You guys have to
significant
give me
role to
$2
play
every time that
on
you're wrong and
January
I'm right.
6th,
That's the rule.
in announcing the outcome of the election.
I'm just kidding. That's not
He
actually a
told me
rule.
that he had been first elected to Congress in 2000 and that one of his earliest memories as a congressman was sitting in on the 2001 certification. And he recalled that Al Gore had gavelled down a number of objections that had been raised to Florida. And he asked me mechanically, how does this work at the joint session? What are the rules? And I told the vice president that, in fact, I had a fairly good idea of how things work, that actually there aren't rules that govern the joint session, but what there is a provision of the Constitution that's just one sentence long, and then an Electoral Count Act that had been passed in 1887. And I told the vice president that I could put a memo together for him overnight that would explain the applicable rules.
So, Mr. Jacobs, when you looked at this theory, what did you conclude?
So we concluded that what you have is a sentence in the Constitution that is inartfully drafted. But the vice president's first instinct when he heard this theory was that there was no way that our framers, who abhorred concentrated power who had broken away from the tyranny of George III would ever have put one person, particularly not a person who had a direct interest in the
wasn't
outcome
one
because they were on the
person.
ticket for the election,
These people
in
are
a
so
role to
disingenuous.
have decisive impact
That
on the
wasn't what
outcome
it
of the
was.
election.
It wasn't one person. It was
And
sending it back
my
to the
review
states.
of text, history,
I'm not a lawyer and I understand the
and
difference. Why don't
frankly,
these
just
people
common
understand
sense
nuance?
all
Oh, wait, they're trying to
confirm
craft a narrative so
the
they
Vice
can shill
President's first
propaganda.
instinct
Got it.
on that point. There is no justifiable basis to conclude that the Vice President has that kind of authority.
Thank you, Mr. Jacobs.
Then why
We
does
will hear
his
more
role
today about
even
how,
exist?
despite this
Then why does it
conclusion
even
by you
exist?
and
Is
other
it
top
purely ceremonial?
legal advisors, the former president used this discredited
Does he
theory
have no actual
in
powers,
his
Vice President? I mean, we
campaign to
know that,
pressure the vice
you know, it's
president
basically a
to
superfluous excellency
decide
type
the
position, but
outcome of
like,
the
are
presidential
we
election.
suggesting that that is a
I now
ceremonial role?
recognize the gentlewoman from Wyoming, Ms. Cheney.
Did they write into the
Question.
Constitution a
Thank you very
ceremonial
much,
role?
Mr. Chairman. Judge Ludig, thank you as well for being here with us today. You issued a very important statement earlier today, which I urge all Americans to read.
Yes, there's no way our founders
And
would have
I'd like
done
to
mail-in
ask
voting
you,
either.
Judge, about,
Excellent point, Sam.
one of the sentences in your
Excellent.
statement, and ask if you could explain to us the significance of it. You say, had the Vice President of the United States obeyed the President of the United States, America would immediately have been plunged into what would have been tantamount to a revolution within a paralyzing constitutional crisis. Could you elaborate on that for us, Judge?
Did he just fall asleep?
Thank you.
He did. He fell asleep.
Madam
Who the
Vice
fuck is
Chairman.
this? Is he going to cry?
That passage in my statement this morning referenced
This is the best they
the
could
most
do?
foundational
What?
concept
Oh my
in
God.
America, which
We are
is
so
the rule
fucked.
of law.
These people are in
Thus,
charge.
as I interpret your question,
He can't even
you
make
were
a
asking
statement.
about that foundational truth of these United States, which we call America.
Who
The
is this guy?
foundational truth is the rule
How
of law.
is this real?
That foundational truth is, for the United States of America, the profound truth. But it's not merely the profound truth for the United States. It's also the simple truth. The simple
This is elder abuse.
foundational
We're
truth
watching elder abuse in front of us right now. What
the
is going
American
on?
Republic.
Who is this person? He's saying nothing of substance.
Thus,
This is even worse than I
in
thought.
my view, the hearings being conducted by this
Yeah. Blink
select
twice if they've got
committee
you captured and tied to the
are
chair. Blink if you need help.
examining that profound truth, namely the rule of law in the United States of America. The specific question, of course, before you and before the nation, not before me, is whether
Are they
that
holding your family hostage? What is
foundational
going
rule of
on?
law
What is wrong with you?
was supremely violated on January 6, 2021.
Are they telling you what to say right now with an earpiece?
Now, to the question specifically that you asked.
I can't speed him up. This is live. I can't speed it up.
Madam Vice Chair,
Look, Liz Cheney's about to cry.
I believe that had Vice President Pence obeyed the orders
Obeyed the orders?
from his president and the President of the United States of America during the joint session of the Congress of the United States on January 6, 2021, and declared Donald Trump the next President of the United States, notwithstanding that then President Trump had lost the Electoral College vote as well as the popular vote in the 2020 presidential election. That declaration of Donald Trump as the next president would have plunged America into what I believe would have been tantamount to a revolution within a constitutional crisis
This is painful.
in America, which in my view, and I'm only one man,
This is
would have
legitimately
been
painful.
the first constitutional crisis since the founding of the Republic.
Thank you.
I have
very
no
much,
idea what he just
Judge,
said because that was so
for your solemn
distracting.
attention to these issues and for your appearance here today. We're going to describe and discuss in detail what happened. And as we do, I'm going to describe a few of the details now of
So
some of
Liz
the
is going to
actions
say something and
taken,
they're going to ask him for the shortest
by a
possible answer.
gentleman
She's
named
going to be like,
Kenneth
did I just
Cheeseborough,
describe this correctly? Yes or no? Just say yes or no.
after
Don't
the,
elaborate. Just say yes or
Electoral
no.
College met and cast their votes
What the hell
on
was
December
that?
14th. Actually, the day before they met, Kenneth Cheeseborough sent a
Yeah, even
memo
Cheney looked
to
confused.
Rudy
She's like, oh
Giuliani,
God,
the
oh
president's
God,
lead
this is
outside
horrible. Oh
counsel.
God.
Mr. Cheeseborough wrote to Mayor Giuliani that the vice president is charged with, quote, making judgments about what to do if there are conflicting votes, close quote. Mr. Cheeseborough wrote that when the joint session of Congress got to Arizona in the alphabetical list of states, the vice president should
Yeah.
not count
Liz is like, let me
votes,
take a
quote,
stab at this.
because there are two slates of votes. His justification, which we will learn more about in our next hearing, was that a group of Trump supporters in Arizona and other swing states decided to proclaim themselves the true electors for the state, creating two sets of electors, the official electors selected by the state and a group of fake electors. This document was ordered to be produced to the Select Committee by a federal district court judge. As you will see on the screen shortly, Judge David Carter wrote, quote, the draft memo pushed a strategy that knowingly violated the Electoral Count Act. The judge concluded that, quote, the memo is both intimately related to and clearly advanced the plan to obstruct the joint session of Congress on January 6, 2021. A few days later, Professor John Eastman took up this cause. Eastman was at the time a law professor at Chapman University Law School. He prepared a memo outlining the nonsensical theory that the vice president could decide the outcome of the election at the joint session of Congress on January 6th. You will see portions of this memo on the screen. In the first line, he wrote, quote, 7 states have transmitted dual slates of electors to the President of the Senate. But Dr. Eastman goes on to rely on those
President of the Senate
so-called
being
dual
Pence.
slates of electors to say that Vice President Pence could simply declare President Trump the winner of the 2020 election.
No.
Mr. Jacob, were there in fact dual slates of electors from 7 states?
No, there were not.
And just a few days after that, Dr. Eastman wrote another memo. This one, quote, wargaming out several scenarios. He knew the outcome he wanted, and he saw a way to go forward if he simply pretended that fake electors were real.
Oh, you mean like
You will
this
see that
trial
memo
list? You
up
had
on
the
the
outcome
screen
that you
now.
wanted, and then you just
Here,
found
Dr. Eastman
evidence to
says
fit the
Vice
narrative that you wanted to
President
tell,
can
ignoring
reject
all
the Biden
evidence to the
electors from
contrary.
the states that he calls, quote, disputed. Under several of the scenarios, the Vice
Yes,
President
I
could
deserve
ultimately
reparations for
just
this.
declare Donald Trump the winner, regardless of the vote totals that had already been
Please send me
certified by the states.
reparations.
However,
It's
this was
too early for
false,
this. I know it's 1
and
o'clock,
Dr.
but it's
Eastman
still too
knew
early.
it was false. In other words, it was a lie. In fact, on December 19th, 2020, just 4 days before Dr. Eastman sent this memo, Dr. Eastman himself admitted in an email that the fake electors had no legal weight, referring to the fake electors as,
She
quote,
deserves to lose
dead
her
on
job.
arrival in Congress, end quote.
She's going to get a
Because they
cushy
did not
commentator
have a
deal on
certification from
CNN.
their states. Judge Ludig, did the Trump electors in those 7 states who were not certified by any state authority have any legal significance?
Oh, God. Oh, God. Oh, God. Is he going to have a stroke
Congresswoman, there was
on live television? I don't wish that
no
on anyone, by the
support
way, but this is deeply alarming to me what
whatsoever
we're watching right
in
now.
either
What the hell
the
is wrong with this
Constitution of the
guy?
United States, nor the laws of the United States for the Vice President.
Probably Liz
Frankly,
Cheney, because Liz Cheney has
ever.
some actual power and Nick Sarwark has no actual
count
power. He just pretends he does.
Alternative
So probably
electoral
Liz.
slates from the states that had not been
Good question, though,
officially
Sam.
certified by the designated state official in the Electoral Count Act of 1887. I did notice in the passage from Mr. Eastman's memorandum, and I took a note on it, and correct me if I'm wrong, but he said in that passage that there was both legal authority as well as historical precedent. I do know what Mr. Eastman was referring to when he said that there was historical precedent for doing so.
Does anyone else just feel really uncomfortable watching this?
He
Like
was incorrect.
really, really uncomfortable, physically
There
uncomfortable?
was no historical
I need to smudge.
precedent
Hang on.
from the beginning of the founding in
Palo
1789
Santo.
that even as mere historical precedent,
This is awful to watch. This is worse
as
than Liz
distinguished
Cheney.
from legal precedent, would support the possibility of the Vice President of the United States, quote, counting
Fire.
alternative electoral slates that had not been officially certified to the Congress pursuant to the Electoral Count Act of 1887.
No, it's Palo Santo, Scott.
Would be glad to explain that historical precedent if the committee wanted, but it would be a digression.
Thank you very much, Judge. I know my colleagues will be pursuing that issue in more depth. And now
You
I'd
are
like to yield back,
dismissed.
Mr. Chairman.
You are dismissed,
Thank
Judge.
you very much. Pursuant to Section 5C8 of House Resolution 503, the chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Aguilar, and staff counsel, Mr. John Wood, for questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Wow.
We're fortunate to have a bipartisan
Dismiss the
staff.
witnesses. This is awful.
Senior
You
investigative
don't have a
counsel John
bipartisan
Wood
staff.
previously served as United States Attorney in Missouri.
Watch his eyes.
under President
Teleprompter.
George W. Bush. He and I will share today's lines of
Teleprompter.
questioning. Mr. Wood?
Oh, he
Thank
looks
you, Mr.
between the
Aguilar.
teleprompter and the camera.
Judge Ludig, I had the incredible honor of serving as one of your law clerks. Another person who did was John Eastman. And you have written that Dr. Eastman's theory that the vice president could determine who the next president of the United States is, in your words, incorrect at every turn. Could you please explain briefly your analysis?
Briefly, he says. He's gonna fall over.
It was my honor,
Oh my
Mr.
God.
Wood, to have you serve as my law clerk.
This guy served as his law clerk. The guy questioning him has served as his law clerk.
I could answer that question.
They did take
perfectly
him hostage.
if I
They
had,
did.
At my disposal.
They've got something on this guy.
Either Mr. Eastman's tweet or my own analytical tweet of September 21st.
An analytical tweet? There is no such thing as
But
an
I
analytical
don't.
tweet.
But
An analytical tweet?
that said, let me try to remember the analysis of
I feel so bad for this guy.
Mr. Eastman's analysis.
And Judge,
Well,
I
apparently
can
it was
read to you and to
oh,
the audience.
yeah,
I think
he's
what
like,
was a really
"Let me
key
help
passage
you."
From your very insightful analysis.
Person we've taken
wrote,
hostage.
I believed that Professor Eastman was incorrect.
He's literally
at every
reminding
turn
him of the
in
analysis that
his
he
January
made.
2nd memorandum, beginning with
This
his
guy
claim
doesn't
that
remember
there
his
were
own
legitimate
analysis.
competing slates of electors presented from 7 states. And you've already addressed that issue. But your next sentence said, continuing to his
Objection, leading the
conclusion
witness.
that the vice
Objection,
president could
speculative.
unilaterally decide not to count the votes from the 7 states from which competing slates were allegedly presented. So what was your basis for concluding that Dr. Eastman was incorrect in his conclusion that the vice president could unilaterally decide not to count the votes from these disputed states?
He's literally reading his own analysis to him to remind him what he said. This is mind-bogglingly
As I
bad.
previously stated in response to
Why don't I have beer?
Congresswoman Cheney, there was no basis in the Constitution or laws of the United States at all for the theory espoused by Mr. Eastman. At all. None. With all respect to my co-panelist, he said, I believe in partial response to one of the
I feel so
Select
bad for
Committee's
this guy.
questions, that the single sentence in the 12th Amendment
He should not be doing this, right? They shouldn't have made him do this. This is ridiculous.
was, he
He
thought,
can't even speak
inartfully
in a
written.
coherent sentence.
That single sentence is not inartfully written. It was pristine clear.
Christine clear.
President of the Senate on January 6th, the incumbent Vice President of the United States, had little
They couldn't even
substantive
find someone to
constitutional
speak
authority,
coherently.
if any, at all. The 12th Amendment, the single sentence that Mr. Jacob refers to, says in substance that following the transmission of the certificates to the Congress of the United States and under the Electoral Count Act of 1887, the archivist of the United
Democrats on
States,
Twitter are saying that this guy is intentionally sabotaging the hearing. That's what they're saying
the
right now.
presiding officer
And then they're
shall
infighting about whether or not
open
this guy is
the certificates
intentionally sabotaging things.
in the presence of the Congress of the United States in joint session. It then says unmistakably, not even that the Vice President himself shall
He's
count
slurring his
the
words.
electoral votes.
Even speaking slowly, he's slurring. This guy has dementia or something. Maybe not dementia
clearly
specifically, but something is
says
obviously and clearly wrong.
merely that the electoral count votes shall then be counted. It was the Electoral Count Act of 1887 that that filled in, if you will, the simple words of the 12th Amendment in order to construct for the country.
He doesn't look like he's had a stroke. I hope he hasn't had a stroke.
Process for the counting.
But like, I know when my grandmother had a stroke, like half of her
sacred
face didn't move anymore.
Process.
And I don't know if that's
for the
true of
counting
everyone,
of the
but I'm just going
electoral
based on my personal
votes
experience.
From the states.
Sin is suspecting heart problems.
Neither our original Constitution.
I mean, he did look like he was having trouble breathing a couple times. Is
the
this guy
12th
about to have a
Amendment
heart attack on national television?
had done. The irony, if you will, is that from its founding until 1887, when Congress passed the Electoral Count Act,
Sean says, reminder, Wisconsin
nation
Supreme
had
Court
been
ruled
in
2020 election for presidential electors was
considerable
illegally handled by
turmoil
Wisconsin election officials with indefinite
at
confined.
least 5
I don't know
of
what
its
that last bit
presidential
means, Sean, but I'll take
elections,
your word for it.
beginning as soon thereafter from the founding. as
We have to watch
1800.
this whole hearing now because I'm absolutely concerned this guy's going to have a heart
So
attack
it
on
wasn't
national
for
TV.
Almost 100 years later until the Electoral Count Act was passed. So that's why, in my view, that piece of legislation is not only a work in progress for the country, but at this moment in history, an important work in progress that needs to take place. That was long-winded, I understand.
Well, Judge Ludig, at the
He
risk of
looks like he's gonna
oversimplifying for the
cry. I feel so
non-lawyers who
bad
are
for this
watching,
guy.
is it fair to say that the 12th Amendment basically says two things happen? The Vice President opens the certificates and the electoral votes are counted. Is it that straightforward?
That's a yes or no question. That is a yes or no question. Yes or no.
I would not want that to be my testimony before the Congress of the United States.
No, it is not that straightforward. No.
The language.
Thank you, Judge. Mr. Jacob, I have a question for you. I believe during your deposition before this committee, you said something to the effect of you'd read every word written about the 12th Amendment, the Electoral Count Act, and historical practice. I know in response to the chairman's earlier question, you gave your bottom line conclusion, but can you tell us a little bit about the process that you and your colleagues went through of researching this issue and what conclusion you came to after your thorough research?
So
This is crazy.
you, as a lawyer who's analyzing a constitutional provision, you start with the constitutional text, you go to structure, you go to history. So we started with the text. We did not think that the text was quite as unambiguous as Judge Ludig indicated. In part, we had a constitutional crisis in 1876 because in that year, multiple slates of electors were certified by multiple slates. And when it came time to count those votes, the antecedent question of which ones had to be answered. That required the appointment of an independent commission. That commission had to resolve that question, and the purpose of the Electoral Count Act of 1887 had been to resolve those latent ambiguities. Now, I'm in complete agreement with Judge Ludig. It is unambiguous that the vice president does not have the authority to reject electors. There is no suggestion of any kind that it does. There is no mention of rejecting or objecting to electors anywhere in the 12th Amendment. And so the notion that the vice president could do that certainly is not in the
So
text.
then
The problem,
why is there even a ceremony
that
in
we
which they're
had and that John
certified?
Eastman raised in our discussions was we had all seen that in Congress in 2000, in 2004, in 2016, there had been objections raised to various states. And those had even been debated in 2004. And so here you have an amendment that says nothing about objecting or rejecting, and yet we did have some recent practice of that happening within the terms of the Electoral Count Act. So we started with that text. And I recall in my discussion with the vice president, he said, I can't wait to go to heaven and meet the framers and tell them the work that you did in putting together our Constitution is a work of genius. Thank you. It was divinely inspired. There is one sentence that I would like to talk to you a little bit about. So then we went to structure. And again, the vice president's first instinct here is so decisive on this question. There's just no way that the framers of the Constitution, who divided power and authority, who separated it out, who had broken away from George III and declared him to be a tyrant, there was no way that they would have put in the hands of one person the authority to determine who was going to be president of the United States. And then we went to history. We examined every single electoral vote count that had happened in Congress since the beginning of the country. We examined the Electoral Count Act. We examined practice under the Electoral Count Act. And critically, no vice president in 230 years of history had ever claimed to have that kind of authority, hadn't claimed authority to reject electoral votes, had not claimed authority to return electoral votes back to the states. In the entire history of the United States, not once had a joint session ever returned electoral votes back to the states to be counted. And in the crisis of 1876, Justice Bradley of the United States Supreme Court, who supplied the decisive final vote on that commission, had specifically looked at that question and said, first, the vice president clearly doesn't have authority to decide anything. And by the way, also does not have authority to conduct an investigation by sending things back out for a public look at things. So the history was absolutely decisive.
So they
And again,
expressed an
part of
opinion
my
that you did not
discussion
agree with.
with
Got
Mr.
it.
Eastman
Got it.
was,
They
if
expressed
you
an
were
opinion
right,
you did
don't
not
you think
agree
Al
with.
Gore might have liked to have known in 2000 that he had authority to just declare himself president of the United States? Did you think that the Democrat lawyers just didn't think of this very obvious quirk that he could use to do that? And of course, he acknowledged Al Gore did not and should not have had that authority at that point in time. But so text, structure, history, I think what we had was some ambiguous text that common sense and structure would tell you the answer cannot possibly be that the vice president has that authority. As the committee already played the vice president's remarks, there is almost no idea more.
What they should have done is just allow the representatives who are going to object to object. They should have just presented the evidence once those objections were made, because they would have had no choice, and then we have all could have moved on with life. That's what should
Thank
have
you. I
happened.
reserve the remainder
And
of my time.
they shouldn't have been screwing around with this
Mr.
Pence
Jacob,
thing. I'm
you weren't the
sorry. I
only
know people
one
disagree with me on
who
this, but this
knew
was
that the legal
always a
theory was
bad
wrong,
idea.
though.
It was always a
Here's
bad
what
idea.
various advisors to the president thought about that theory.
Oh, a
You've been
video.
clear repeatedly with Mr. Meadows about you and the vice president having a different view about his authority on January 6th.
I believe I had.
Did Mr. Meadows ever explicitly or tacitly agree with you or say, yeah, that makes sense or okay?
I believe that that Mark did agree.
What makes you say that?
I believe that's what he told me, but as I mentioned, I think Mark had told so many people so many different things that it was not something that that I would necessarily accept as, okay, well, that means that's resolved.
I see. Tell me more what he told you on this topic.
Well, I think it was that, the vice president doesn't have any broader role. And I think he was understanding of that.
So despite the fact that he may have said other things to the president or others, to you, he said he understands the vice president has no role.
Yes,
Okay. Did he say that to you several times?
a couple of times.
Before January 6th?
Yes.
The way it was communicated to me was that Pat Cipollone thought the idea was nutty and had at one point confronted Eastman basically with the same sentiment.
Pat expressed his admiration for the vice president's actions on the day of the 6th and said that he concurred with the legal analysis that our team had put together to reach that point.
It made no sense to me that in all the protections that were built into the Constitution for a president to get elected and steps that had to be taken, that the power to choose the next president would be sitting with the vice president.
Do you know if Mr. Clark or Mr. Morgan, is it Morgan, thought about that, Mr. Eastman's advice?
Yeah, they thought he was crazy.
Do you know if they ever expressed an opinion on whether they thought the vice president had the power that John Eastman said he did?
I know for a fact I heard both say that his theory was crazy, that there was no validity to it in any way, shape, or form.
And did they express that before January 6th?
Yes.
To whom?
I think anyone who would listen.
Okay, what were your prior interactions with Eastman?
He described for me what he thought the ambiguity
All right, guys,
was
I'm
in the
trying to send
statute,
out an email about my
and he was looking
audiobook being
through it
available
at that
again, so I'm
time.
kind of doing
And I
double duty
said,
here.
Hold on a second. I want to understand what you're saying. You're saying that you believe the vice president, acting as president of the Senate, can be the sole decision maker as to, under your theory, who becomes the next president of the United States? And you said yes. And
I don't hate
I
that
said,
panda
"Are you
picture
out of
he
your
has in the
effing
background.
mind?"
The justice bat is a little
Right,
much.
and
Is he in his bathroom?
That was pretty
Is he
blunt.
testifying from his bathroom? Why are
completely
there
crazy.
spigots on the wall?
You're going to turn around
Is he in a bathroom?
and tell 78 plus million people in this country that your theory is this is how you're going to invalidate their votes because you think the election was stolen? And I said, they're not going to tolerate that. He said, you're going to cause riots in the streets. And he said words to the effect of there's been violence in the history of our country, Eric, to protect the democracy or protect the republic.
In fact, there was a risk that the lawyers in the White House counsel's office would resign. For example, Fox News host Sean Hannity expressed concern that the entire White House counsel's office could quit. As you can see from these texts, Mr. Hannity wrote to White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows that, quote, "We can't lose the entire White House counsel's office. I do not see January 6th happening the way he is being told." A few days later, on January 5th, Mr. Hannity wrote to Mr. Meadows that, quote, "I'm very worried the next 48 hours. Pence pressure, White House counsel will leave." While Sean Hannity was apparently very concerned about the possibility that the White House counsel would resign in protest of the president's effort to force the vice president to violate the Constitution, some others close to the president were more dismissive of the White House counsel's position.
Camera.
Here's what
Teleprompter.
Trump's son-in-law and senior advisor Jared Kushner said during his
I
deposition
will hate you,
regarding the White
Scott.
House
Don't
counsel
torrent my
Pat
audiobook.
Cipollone's threats to resign.
I worked hard on that audiobook, dude.
Jared,
For real.
are
That was
you
a stressful
aware
thing to record.
of,
Don't torrent it.
Instances where Pat Cipollone
That's not very
threatened to
liberal.
resign?
You're stealing my stuff, Scott. That is
like I
not
said,
libertarian.
My interest at that time was on trying to get as many pardons done. And I know that, he was always, him and the team were always saying, oh, we're going to resign. We're not going to be here if this happens, if that happens. So I kind of took it up to just be whining, to be honest with you.
The president's own lead outside counsel, Rudy Giuliani, also seemed to concede that the vice president did not have the authority to decide the outcome of the election.
Sean Hannity is not the authority.
Here's what White House Attorney
Sean
Eric
Hannity is
Hirschman
not the boss of
said
us.
about his call with Mayor Giuliani on the morning of the 6th.
The morning of January 6th, I think he called me out of the blue, right? And I was like getting dressed. And we had an intellectual discussion about Eastman's, I don't know if it's Eastman's theory per se, but the VP's role. And he was asking me my view and analysis and then the practical implications of it. And when we finished, he said, like, I believe that, you're probably right. I think he thought when we're done that it would be something he'd have to consider if he was sitting on the bench, but he'd probably come down in that, you couldn't interpret it or sustain the argument long term.
Of course, the fact that Mayor Giuliani seemed to admit that the theory was wrong did not stop him from going before the crowd just a few hours later on January 6th and saying the exact opposite. Here's Mayor Giuliani's speech at the Ellipse rally on January 6th.
We're here just very briefly to make a very important 2 points.
Thank you, Scott, for not
Number
torrenting
one,
my book. I appreciate
every
it.
single thing that has been outlined as the plan for today is perfectly legal. I have Professor Eastman here with me to say a few words about that.
So play his words.
He's one of the preeminent constitutional scholars in the United States. It is perfectly appropriate, given the questionable constitutionality of the Election Counting Act of 1887, that the vice president can cast it aside, and he can do what a president called Jefferson did when he was vice president. He can decide.
Fucking Rudy.
He can decide
Ruins
on the
everything.
validity of these crooked
Ruins
ballots,
everything.
or he can send it back to the legislatures, give them 5 to 10 days to finally finish the work.
And here's what Dr. Eastman said in his speech at the Ellipse on January 6th.
And all we are demanding of Vice President Pence is this afternoon at 1 o'clock, he let the legislatures of the state look into this so we get to the bottom of it and the American people know whether we have control of the direction of our government or not.
Even Dr. Eastman knew his theory didn't hold water. Mr. Jacob, you discussed and even debated this theory at length with Dr. Eastman. Did Dr. Eastman ever tell you what he thought the U.S. Supreme Court would do if it had to decide this
I should have
issue?
worn a clown costume for this. You're right, Alex. You're right. Hang on.
We had an extended discussion,
You're right.
an hour and a half to 2 hours on January 5th. And when I pressed him on the point, I said, John, if the vice president did what
There
you're
was
asking
nothing
him to
wrong with
do,
that
we would
statement.
lose 9-0 in the Supreme Court, wouldn't we? And he initially started it, well, I think maybe you would lose only 7-2. And after some further discussion, acknowledged, well, yeah, you're right, we would lose 9-0.
I appreciate that. In our investigation, the Select Committee has obtained evidence suggesting that Dr. Eastman never really believed his own theory. Let me explain. On the screen, you can see a draft letter to the president from October 2020. In this letter, an idea was proposed that the vice president could
you're welcome to
determine
reach out,
which
Scott.
electors to count at the joint session of Congress. But the person
Happy to
writing in
talk.
blue eviscerates that argument. The person who wrote the comments in blue wrote, quote, "The 12th Amendment only says that the President of the Senate opens the ballots in the joint session, and then, in the passive voice, that the votes shall then be counted." The comments in blue further state, "Nowhere does it suggest that the President of the Senate gets to make the determination on his own." Judge Ludig, does it surprise you that the author of those comments in blue was in fact John Eastman?
Yes, it does, Congressman. But let me, watching this unfold, let me try to unpack what was at the root of what I have called the blueprint to overturn the 2020 election. And it is this. And I had foreshadowed this answer.
Oh,
in my
they
earlier
sped him up. Okay, okay.
testimony
They sped him up
to
slightly.
Congresswoman Cheney.
I suppose that's good.
Mr. Eastman, from the beginning, said to the president that there was both legal as well as historical precedent for the vice president to overturn the election. And what we've heard today, I believe, is what happened within the White House and elsewhere as all the players led by Mr. Eastman got wrapped around the axle by the historical evidence claim by Mr. Eastman. Let me explain very simply. This is what I said would require a digression that I would be glad to undertake if you wished. In short, if I had been advising the Vice President of the United States on January 6th, and even if then Vice President Jefferson and even then Vice President John Adams.
No, we're back. We're back. Nope.
And even then Vice President Richard
Vice President
Nixon.
Vice President, he just said, not President, President.
Had done exactly what the President of the United States wanted his Vice President to do. I would have laid my body across the road before I would have let the Vice President overturn the 2020 election on the basis of that historical precedent. But what this body needs to know, and now America needs to know, is that that was the centerpiece of the plan to overturn the 2020 election. It was the historical precedent in the years and with the vice presidents that I named, as Congressman Raskin understands well. And the effort by Mr. Eastman and others was to drive that historical precedent up to and under that single sentence, single pristine sentence
Wait, is the Supreme Court
in
overturning
the
Miranda?
12th Amendment to the United States Constitution,
What is going on?
taking advantage of, if you will,
Wow.
what many
I'm looking at a tweet from Justin
have
O'Donnell right
said
now that's far more interesting than
is
whatever
the
this guy's saying.
inartful wording
Wow.
of that sentence in the 12th Amendment. Scholars before 2020 would have used that historical precedent to argue not that Vice President Pence could overturn the 2020 election by accepting non-certified state electoral votes, but they would have made arguments as to some substantive, not merely procedural, authority possessed by the Vice President of the United States on the statutorily prescribed day for counting the Electoral College votes. This is constitutional mischief.
Judge, I think that's a good point. And I think it kind of begs the question that if the vice president had this power to determine the outcome of a presidential election, why hasn't it ever been used before? Why hasn't that ever happened? Why hasn't a vice president simply rejected the outcome of an election and declared someone else the winner? And instead, as the chairman mentioned in his opening, for over 2 centuries, vice presidents have presided over the joint sessions of Congress in a purely ceremonial role. This even includes, as Mr. Jacob mentioned, Vice President Al Gore. For those of us who are old enough to remember, the 2000 election came down to one state, Florida. There were weeks of recounts and litigation after the election, and Al Gore conceded. Of course, Al Gore was vice president at the time, but he never suggested that he could simply declare himself the winner of the 2000
Peter, it
election.
looks like the Supreme Court's going to overturn Miranda.
Of the electoral
Based on what I'm
votes.
seeing, it looks like
Let's
it might
hear what
actually happen.
Vice President Gore said when he described the situation he faced in 2000.
Importance of the United States of America in all of human history. In Lincoln's phrase, we still are the last best hope of humankind. And the choice between one's own disappointment in your personal career and upholding
This is the most depressing Orwellian like
democracy.
scene that has ever
It's a
been had
pretty
at an
easy choice
inauguration.
when it comes down to it.
Mr. Jacob, did Dr. Eastman say whether he would want other vice presidents such as Al Gore after the 2000 election or Kamala Harris after the 2024 election to have the power to decide the
People
outcome
are
of the
saying that it looks
election?
like it's going to be overturned, guys.
So this was one of the many points that we discussed on January 5th. He had come into that meeting trying to
Justin's
persuade
saying
us
it's
that
reported
there's
on the
validity
news,
to his
and
theory.
I
viewed
tend to
it as
trust
my
Justin
objective to
O'Donnell because
persuade
he's
him
right all the time.
acknowledge he was just
Every
wrong.
time
And I
Justin
thought
says
this
something, he
had to be
turns
one
out,
of the
well,
most
not every time, but
powerful
most of the time Justin says something,
arguments.
he turns out to be right.
John, back in 2000, you weren't jumping up and saying
He's a reliable
Al Gore had
source.
this authority to do that. You would not want Kamala Harris to be able to exercise that kind of authority in 2024 when I hope Republicans will win the election. And I know you hope that too, John. And he said,
You don't want
absolutely.
Republicans to win the
Al Gore did
election.
not
You
have
want
a basis to
establishment
do it in
shills to win
2000.
the election, you
Kamala
liar.
Harris shouldn't be able to do it in 2024, but I think you should do it today.
Mark Short told the Select Committee that Vice President Pence consulted with one of his predecessors, Vice President Dan Quayle, regarding the role of the Vice President. Vice President Quayle confirmed Pence's view that the role was purely ceremonial. Mr. Short also told the committee that he, Mr. Short,
Then why don't we just
received
get
a
rid of
call
the vice
from former House
presidency
Speaker Paul
entirely?
Ryan.
If it's just
Here is Mr.
ceremonial, if it's just
Short's
for show,
description of his conversation
then
with
why don't we
Speaker
just get
Ryan.
rid of it entirely? Why are the taxpayers
Speaker Ryan
funding
wanted
something
to
that is
call and
purely
say,
ceremonial?
You don't have any greater authority. And I said to him, Mr. Speaker, you know Mike, he recognizes that. And we sort of laughed about it, and he said, I get it. And he later spoke to the vice president too, to, I think, have the same conversation.
Fortunately for the fate of our republic, Vice President Pence refused to go along with President Trump's demands that he determine the outcome of the presidential election. Mr. Jacob, what was the vice president's reaction when you discussed with him the theory that the vice president could decide the outcome of the election?
Congressman, as I've testified, the vice president's first instinct was that there was no way that any one person, particularly the vice president who is on the ticket and has a vested outcome in the election, could possibly have the authority to decide it by rejecting electors or to decisively alter the outcome by suspending the joint session for the first time in history in order to try to get a different outcome from state legislatures.
Despite the fact that the vice president had a strongly held and correct view that he could not decide the outcome of the election, President Trump launched a multi-week campaign of both public and private pressure to get the Vice President Mike Pence to violate the Constitution. Here are some examples of the intense pressure the Vice President faced from all sides and what his Chief of Staff thought of it.
I hope Mike Pence comes through for us, I have to tell you. I hope that our great Vice President comes through for us. He's a great guy. Of course, if he doesn't come through, I won't like him quite as much.
Was it your impression that the vice president had directly
I'm sorry, that's
conveyed
funny.
his
That's funny. I'm
position
sorry.
on these issues to the
I
president?
may not agree with Trump
just
on
to
everything,
the
but I can
world
laugh at his
through a dear
jokes.
colleague letter, but directly to President Trump,
Many times.
and had been consistent in conveying his position to the president.
Very consistent.
I am aware of the fact that the president was upset with the way Pence acted.
Are we to assume that this is going to be a climactic battle?
Well, I think that a lot of that depends on the courage and the spine of the individuals involved.
That would be a nice way to say a guy named Vice President Mike Pence?
Yes.
I think we've been clear as to what the vice president's role was. I think the vice president made clear with the president. I think I've been clear with Mark Meadows.
I think the vice president is going to throw down tomorrow and do the right thing because, Lou, like I said before, this is a time for choosing. People are going to look back at this moment tomorrow and remember where every
I don't know what to think of
single
Jason Miller.
one
What do you
of their
guys think of
elected
Jason
officials
Miller?
were.
Because I
Did they vote
feel
for
like
the rule of
he
law and getting these
sometimes says
elections
the right
right,
thing and
or did
sometimes
they
he
give it away
doesn't. And
to
I
the
feel like
Democrats
he's
and the people who
being
cheated and stole
like
their
a
way
pretty
through this election?
responsible CEO
Definitely
getter,
the,
but I'm also
you know,
like,
not back in the
eh,
talk, say like the fifth and
I
the
don't
sixth.
know.
The
I don't know what to
president
think of
was,
him.
You know, all the attention was on what Mike would do or what Mike wouldn't do.
The vice president really was not wavering in his commitment to what his responsibility was. And so, yeah, was it painful? Sure.
The president's pressure campaign started in December. For example, although the vice president made his views clearly and unmistakably known to the president and others in the White House, on December 23rd,
yes, that's the case. That's the
President
case.
Trump retweeted a memo from an individual named Ivan Reichland entitled Operation Pence Card.
That was the case they
It called
heard.
on the vice president to refuse the Electoral College votes from certain states that had certified Joe Biden as the winner. President Trump started his pressure campaign in December, but he dialed up the pressure as January 6th approached. The testimony we have received in our investigation indicates that by the time January 4th arrived, President Trump had already engaged in a, quote, multi-week campaign to pressure the vice president to decide the outcome of the election.
Goddamn right, I'm right. Another
This
Karlyn
had
is right
included
tip
private
jar.
conversations between the two leaders, Trump's tweets, and at least one meeting with members of Congress. We understand that the vice president started his day on January 4th with a rally in Georgia for the Republican candidates in the U.S. Senate runoff. When the vice president returned to Washington,
I was at that
he
rally.
was summoned to meet.
I was
with
in the
the
front
president
row at that rally.
regarding the upcoming joint session of Congress. Mr. Jacob,
I have
you
a
attended
picture of
that
Trump
meeting?
pointing at the camera, going like this.
The attendees were the vice president, the president, Mark Short, the chief of staff to the vice president, myself, and John Eastman. There was about a 5-minute period where Mark Meadows came in on a different issue.
Let's show a photo of that meeting. Mr. Jacob, during that meeting between the president and the vice president, what theories did Dr. Eastman present regarding the role of the vice president in counting the electoral votes?
During the meeting on January 4th, Mr. Eastman was opining that there were two legally viable arguments as to authorities that the vice president could exercise 2 days later on January 6th. One of them was that he could reject electoral votes outright. The other was that he could use his capacity as presiding officer to suspend the proceedings and declare essentially a 10-day recess during which states that he deemed to be disputed, there was a list of 5 to 7 states that the exact number changed from conversation to conversation, but that the vice president could sort of issue a demand to the state legislatures in those states to re-examine the election and declare who had won each of those states. So he said that both of those were legally viable options. He said that he did not recommend, upon questioning, he did not recommend what he called the more aggressive option, which was reject outright, because he thought that that would be less politically palatable. The imprimatur of state legislature authority would be necessary to ultimately have public acceptance of an outcome in favor of President Trump. And so he advocated that the preferred course of action would be the procedural route of suspending the joint session and sending the election back to the state.
Thank you, LK. I
Mr.
appreciate
Jacob,
that.
I know you won't discuss the direct conversations between the president and the vice president. So rather than asking you what the vice president said in that meeting, I'll ask you a more general question. Did the vice president ever waver in his position that he could not unilaterally decide which electors to accept?
The vice president never budged from the position that I have described as his first instinct, which was that it just made no sense from everything that he knew and had studied about our Constitution that one person would have that kind of authority.
And did the vice president ever waver in his position that he could not delay certification and send it back to the states?
No, he did not.
Did Dr. Eastman admit in front of the president that his proposal would violate the Electoral Count Act?
So during that meeting on the 4th, I think I raised the problem that both of Mr. Eastman's proposals would violate several provisions of the Electoral Count Act. Mr. Eastman acknowledged that that was the case, that even what he viewed as the more politically palatable option would violate several provisions, but he thought that we could do so because in his view, the Electoral Count Act was unconstitutional. And when I raised concerns that that position would likely lose in court, his view was that the court simply wouldn't get involved. They would invoke the political question doctrine.
And that actually
and
turned out to be
therefore
correct
we
with a
could
lot
have
of the
some
election
comfort
lawsuits, wasn't it?
proceeding, with that path.
The court elected
Mr.
not to
Wood?
get
Just to
involved. That happened with a lot of
reiterate,
them.
He told you, maybe this was in a later conversation, but he told you at some point that if in fact the issue ever got to the Supreme Court, his theory would lose 9-0, correct?
The next morning, starting around 11 or 11:30, we met for an hour and a half to 2 hours. And in that meeting, I've already described the text, structure, history conversation, but we started walking through all of that. And I said, so John, basically what you have is some text that may be a little bit ambiguous, but then nothing else that would support it, including the fact that nobody would ever want that to be the rule. Wouldn't we lose 9-0 in the Supreme Court? And again, he initially started, well, maybe you'd only lose 7-2, but ultimately acknowledged that no, we would lose 9-0. No judge would support his argument.
After his meeting with the vice president, Donald Trump flew to Georgia for a rally in support of the Republican candidates in the United States Senate runoff. Even though the vice president had been steadfast in resisting the president's pressure, President Trump continued to publicly pressure Vice President Pence in his Georgia speech. Rather than focusing exclusively on the Georgia Senate runoff, Trump turned his attention to Mike Pence. Here's what the president said during that rally in Georgia.
Pence comes through for us, I have to tell you. I hope that our great vice president comes through for us. He's a great guy. Of course, if he doesn't come through, I won't like him quite as much.
So the president had been told multiple times that the vice president could not affect the outcome of the election, but he nonetheless publicly pressured Mike Pence to do exactly that by saying, quote, "If he doesn't come through, I won't like him as much."
He made a speech
turn
at a
now
who
to January 5th.
cares? It's a rally
Wood?
speech.
Thank you.
When are
That
they going to
morning,
play the
meaning
part of the
January
speech
5th,
where Trump is like,
the president
go
issued a tweet
peacefully to the
expressly
Capitol? They'll
stating
never
that
play
the
that
vice
part of the
president
speech.
had the power to reject electors. Let's look at what the president wrote. Quote, "The vice president has the power to reject fraudulently chosen electors." Mr. Jacob, you've already told us about your meeting with Dr. Eastman and the president on January 4th, and you briefly made reference to the meeting you had with Dr. Eastman the next day, January 5th. Can you tell us a little bit more about that meeting with Dr. Eastman on January 5th? For example, where was the meeting? Who was there?
So at the conclusion of the meeting on the 4th, the president had asked that that our office meet with Mr. Eastman the next day to hear more about the positions he had expressed at that meeting, and the vice president indicated that sort of offered me up as his counsel to fulfill that duty. So we met in Mark Short's office in the executive office building across the way from the White House. Dr. Eastman had a court hearing by Zoom that morning, so it didn't start first thing, but rather started around 11. And that meeting went for about an hour and a half, 2 hours. Chief of Staff Mark Short was at that meeting most of the time. There were a few times that he left. And essentially it was an extended discussion. What most surprised me about that meeting was that when Mr. Eastman came in, he said, "I'm here to request that you reject the electors." So on the 4th, that had been the path that he had said, "I'm not recommending that you do that." But on the 5th, he came in and expressly requested that.
So he
And
changed his mind.
I grabbed a notebook.
So he
as I was
changed his
heading
mind.
into the meeting. I didn't hear much
Made a
new
different
from
argument.
him
It
to
happens.
record,
That's
but
what happens in the
that was the
world.
first thing I recorded in my notes was request that the VP reject.
Just to be clear, you're
I
saying
hate
that
when I'm
Dr.
stuck in a
Eastman
position of
urged the
defending
vice
things that I
president
don't
to
agree
adopt
with
the very same
because
approach
these people are just idiots.
Dr.
It's like,
Eastman
I
appeared
didn't
to
agree with the
abandon
strategy, but
in the
like at
Oval
the same
Office meeting
time,
with the president the day before. Is
it's
that
not
correct?
illegal to suggest a
He
strategy,
had recommended against
which is
it
why you're not
the
charging
evening
Trump with any
before,
crimes.
and
It
then
wasn't
on the
illegal.
5th, came in and I think it was probably his first words after
You may not have
introductions and as
liked
we
it.
sat down were, "I'm
That
here
doesn't
to
make it
request
illegal.
that you reject the electors in the disputed states."
And you referenced a moment ago some handwritten notes, which you've provided to the Select Committee. I'd now like to show you those notes. As you can see, you wrote there at the top, the writing's a little bit faint in the copy, but you wrote, "Requesting VP reject." Does that accurately reflect what Dr. Eastman asked of you in your meeting on January 5th?
Yes.
And what was your reaction when Dr. Eastman said on January 5th that he was there to ask the Vice President of the United States to reject electors at the joint session of Congress?
I was surprised because I had viewed it as sort of one of the key concessions that we had secured the night before from Mr. Eastman that that he was not recommending that we do that.
So what did you say to him?
Well, as I indicated, to some extent it simplified my task because there are more procedural complexities to the send it back to the states point of view. And I actually had spent most of my evening the night before writing a memorandum to the vice president explaining all of the specific provisions of the Electoral Count Act that plan would violate. So instead, since he was pushing the sort of robust unilateral power theory, I've already walked the committee through the discussions that we had. I started out with our points of commonality, or what I thought were our points of commonality. We're conservatives, we're small government people, we believe in originalism as the means by which we're going to interpret this. And so we walked through the text, we walked through the history, and the committee has shown footage of Mr. Eastman on the stage on the 6th, claiming that Jefferson supported his position in a historical example of Jefferson. In fact, he conceded in that meeting Jefferson did not at all support his position, that in the election of 1800, there had been some small technical defect with the certificate in Georgia. It was absolutely undisputed that Jefferson had won Georgia. Jefferson did not assert that he had any authority.
I'm falling
reject
asleep right
electors.
now.
He did not
Is
assert
anyone else
that he
falling
had
asleep?
any authority to resolve any issue.
I'm sorry.
During the
I know
course
we
of
should
that.
watch this. It's a
And
responsible
so
thing to
he
do, but my
acknowledged by
God,
the
this is
end,
awful.
that there was no historical practice whatsoever that supported his position. He had initially tried to push examples of Jefferson and Adams. He ultimately acknowledged they did not work. As we've covered, he acknowledged it would lose 9-0 in the Supreme Court. He again tried to say, but I don't think the courts will get involved in this. They'll invoke the political question doctrine. And so if the courts stay out of it, that will mean that we'll have the 10 days for the states to weigh in and resolve it.
And the courts ended up not getting involved in a lot of the
they'll-
questions. So it was a pretty reasonable. Oh, why is it buffering? Why is it buffering? What's going on? Why is it buffering? Where is my recording? What is going on? PBS, come back. Come back. What's happening? Oh no. Oh no.
They'll send back
it's
the
back.
Trump slates of electors, and the people will
Maybe
be
that
able
was a
to
YouTube
accept
glitch.
that.
Maybe all of YouTube was buffering for a
expressed
second.
my vociferous disagreement with that point. I did not think that this was a political question. Among other things, if the courts did not step in to resolve this, there was nobody else to resolve it.
Exactly.
You would be
Exactly.
in a
Like the courts
situation
didn't
where you
step
have
in
a
when Texas
standoff
sued.
between the president of the United
There
States
was no
and
resolution because the courts
counterfactually, the
elected
vice
to not
president
step
of the
in.
United
That is exactly
States,
correct. And that was the point
saying
he
that
was effing
we've
making.
exercised authorities that constitutionally we think we have, by which we have deemed ourselves
I mean,
the
it's a
winners of the
public
election.
feed. They can't really do
You would
anything.
have
This
an
is not
opposed
copyrighted. Even if
House and
even if
Senate
I'm watching it on
disagreeing with
PBS,
that.
it's not like this is a
You would
public
have
feed.
state legislatures that, to that point,
YouTube can suck a
Republican
dick.
leaders across those legislatures
They were also buffering, by the
had
way,
put
on
together-
PBS's
had put out
feed.
statements, and
So
we
I think it was
collected
a
these for the
YouTube
vice
glitch.
president as well, that the people had spoken in their states and that they had no intention.
These people
of
win when you get
reversing
too
the outcome of
bored
the
to
election.
continue
We did
watching.
receive some signed letters that
We've trained for
Mr.
this,
Eastman
guys.
forwarded
We have
us
trained for
by
this with 2 years of happy
minorities
hours.
leaders in those
We have
states,
trained for
but
watching boring shit
no
for
state
the
had
2
any
moments
legislative house
in
that
which they
indicated
say
that it had
something
any
that's
interest. So you would
mind-boggling.
have had
You're all prepared for this. I know you can do it.
just an unprecedented
We'll get through this together.
constitutional jump
Even if we don't
ball
have beer.
situation with that standoff. And as I expressed to him, that issue might well then have to be decided in the streets. Because if we can't work it out politically, we've already seen how charged up people are about this election. And so it would be a disastrous situation to be in. So I said, I think the courts will intervene. I do not see a commitment in the Constitution of the question whether the vice president has that authority to some other actor to resolve. There's arguments about whether Congress and the vice president jointly.
That woman behind him, you're
have a
right. You're right,
constitutional
Lindy.
commitment
That
to
woman,
generally
that blonde
decide
woman behind him is about to
electoral
take a
vote
nap.
issues. I don't
She's
think
falling
that they have any
asleep.
authority to object or reject them. I don't see it in the 12th Amendment, but nonetheless. And I concluded by saying, John, in light of everything that we've discussed, can't we just both agree that this is a terrible idea? And he couldn't quite bring himself to say yes to that, but he very clearly said, well, yeah, I see we're not going to be able to persuade you to do this. And that was how the meeting concluded.
But you just described a terrifying scenario. Sounds like there could have been chaos under the Eastman approach, and you even described it as it potentially could be decided in the streets. And you described several concessions that Dr. Eastman made throughout that discussion or even debate that you had with him. At some point during that meeting on January 5th, did Dr. Eastman seem to admit that both of the theories that he had presented to the United States the day before? So the theory that the vice president could reject electors outright and declare Donald Trump the winner, and his less aggressive theory that the vice president could simply send it back to the states. At some point in that conversation on the 5th, did Dr. Eastman seem to admit that both of these theories suffered from similar legal flaws?
So I had at least one, possibly two other conversations with Dr. Eastman later that day. In the earlier meeting, we really were focused, because his request that he made had been reject the electors outright, on why that theory was wrong and why we certainly would not be doing that. Later that day, he pivoted back to, well, we hear you loud and clear, you're not going to reject. But remember last night, I said that there was this more prudent course where you could just send it back to the states. Would you be willing to do that? And during the course of our discussion about his renewed request that we consider that option, he acknowledged to me, he put it, both Mr. Eastman and myself are graduates of the University of Chicago Law School. And he said, look, as graduates of that august institution, you and I will mutually understand that the underlying legal theory of plenary vice presidential authority is what you have to get there. Because this new theory, as I was pointing out to him, or the procedural theory, still violates several provisions of the Electoral Count Act, as he acknowledged. And the only way that you could ever be able to ignore several provisions of statutory law is if it was pretty clear that they were unconstitutional. And the only way they could be unconstitutional is if the vice president had the plenary authorities that were formed the basis for the reject votes as well. So he acknowledged in those conversations that the underlying legal theory was the same. He just thought that the send it back to the states option would be more politically palatable, and he hoped more palatable to the vice president for that reason.
And in fact, when Dr. Eastman made this concession during that meeting, according to your earlier deposition, Dr. Eastman said, just between us, University of Chicago chickens, is that right?
I don't think that the University of Chicago is going to start a Chicago Chickens fundraising club, but yes, that is the terminology that he used. He said, you know, just between us Chicago chickens, we will understand as lawyers who have studied the Constitution that the underlying basis really is the same.
I reserve the remainder of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Wood. Mr. Jacob, the president and the vice president meet again on that same topic the next day, January 5th, correct?
So after my extended meeting with Mr. Eastman that morning, during that time, the vice president had been back at his residence working on his statement to the nation that we released the next day. He got down to the White House some point between 1 o'clock and 2 o'clock as my meeting with
At
Mr.
least they've
Eastman
stopped
was
asking that
wrapping
other
up.
guy questions. I have to
And
give them
when
that.
we-
At least we've moved on
Mark
from
Short
that
and I
charade.
went over to meet with the
Hopefully
vice
someone's given him
president,
medical
and,
attention.
Actually, we thought maybe we had good news. We felt like we had sort of defeated Mr. Eastman, that he was sort of acknowledging that there was no there. But the vice president was then asked down to the Oval Office, and he went down to the Oval Office while Mark and I stayed back in the vice president's office.
You weren't in that meeting.
I was not.
In the book Peril, journalists Bob Woodward and Robert Costa write that the president said, quote, "If these people say you have the power, wouldn't you want to?" The vice president says, quote, "I wouldn't want any one person to have that authority." The president responds, "But wouldn't it almost be cool to have that power?" Vice President is reported to have said, no, look, I've read this and I don't see a way to do it. We've exhausted every option. I've done everything I could and then some to find a way around this. It's simply not possible. My interpretation is no. To which the president says, no, no, no. You don't understand, Mike. You can do this. I don't want to be your friend anymore if you don't do this. We asked Mark Short about this during his
I
deposition.
do not believe that Trump said that. I'm sorry. I do not believe that Trump said, I don't want to be your friend anymore if you can't do this. I don't believe that at all. That is not something Trump would say.
In other conversations with the vice president, he articulated
That is
to
not in
me
Trump's profile
that
at all. He does
no,
not
he
care
wouldn't want
who
that
he is
power
friends
bestowed
with.
upon any one person.
Bullshit.
Mr. Jacob, did you, Mr. Short, and the vice president have a call later that day again with the president and Dr. Eastman?
So, yes, we did.
And what did Dr. Eastman request on that call?
On that phone call, which I believe was around 5 o'clock that afternoon, Mr. Eastman stated that he had heard us loud and clear that morning. We were not going to be rejecting electors, but would we be open to considering the other course that we had discussed on the 4th, which would be to suspend the joint session and request that state legislatures re-examine certification of the electoral votes.
That same day, January 5th, the New York Times ran a story about the disagreement between the president and the vice president about whether the vice president could determine the outcome of the election. Even though the New York Times story was indisputably correct, Donald Trump denied it. Trump issued a statement claiming
The New York
Vice
Times
President
story was
had agreed that he
indisputably
could determine the outcome of
correct.
the election, despite the fact that the vice president had consistently rejected that
Indisputably
position.
correct.
Let's look at what the
I
president
somehow
said
doubt that the New
in
York
his
Times story
statement.
was indisputably correct.
Quote, the New York Times report regarding comments Vice President Pence supposedly made to me today is fake news. He never said that. The vice president and I are in total agreement that the vice president has the power to act. Mr. Jacob, how did the vice president's team react to the statement from the president that the vice president could take an active role in determining the winner of the presidential election?
We were shocked and disappointed because whoever had written and put that statement out, it was categorically untrue.
Vice President's Chief of Staff, Mark Short, had an angry phone call with Trump campaign senior advisor Jason Miller about this statement. Here's what Mr. Short and Mr. Miller told the committee about that call.
Okay, tell me about the conversation you had with Jason.
It was brief. I was irritated and expressed displeasure that statement it could have gone out.
Well, apparently, if you say that in front of Congress, it just becomes fact and truth.
Without consultation.
Congrats to you.
The vice president and I are in total agreement.
That must be really
The
uncomfortable.
vice president has the power to act. Is that incorrect?
I think the record shows that that's incorrect.
Yeah.
I mean, we've been through many documents that clarify that this is not where the vice president was.
Right. So essentially, the president's sending out a baldly
It's all
false
hearsay about
statement
Trump. They have
about
actual
being in
no actual
alignment,
evidence
purported
to
alignment
demonstrate
with
that
the
Trump
vice
said these
president,
things.
despite all of the predicate that you indicated.
Which is
had
why they're
gone
not charging him
before
with a
our
crime.
respective positions. Is that
They
effectively what
can't.
happened?
I interpret the statement as false. I'll let you figure out who sent it out.
When Mark Short contacted you, he was upset. Is that what you said?
He clearly was not pleased.
Tell us what he said.
What's the process for putting out a statement for a meeting where only 2 people were in the room?
Did he ask you to retract the statement?
Why is
No,
Jason
he
Miller
just,
wearing
I
a
think it went
mask
right to
testifying
what's the
by
process
himself in a
for
room
putting out a
on
statement
camera?
For a meeting when
Where
only
no
2
one else
people
is
were in
wearing
the
a mask.
room.
Why the fuck is
And he
Jason
clearly
Miller wearing a
disagreed with
mask?
the substance, though, right?
I
Because
know
he
I've
said
asked this
that
every
he
single
said
one of
the
these
vice president
streams,
doesn't
but
agree with this.
it makes no sense.
Trying to think what exactly he said. I mean, the tone was very clearly that he used some language to
strongly infer that the vice president disagreed with that take, but I don't remember what that language was.
Did he dictate the statement?
He dictated most of it. I mean, typically on these, I might have a couple of wording suggestions.
Breaking out the talkies, guys.
Maybe
I'm doing it.
Have a sentence or a framework.
You're eating
or
a
something
snack
like
right
that.
now. Let us know what you're
But
eating.
I know with specificity on this one that it was me on the phone talking through it, and ultimately the way this came out was the way that he wanted to.
The dispute between the president and the vice president had grown to the point where the vice president's chief of staff, Mark Short, was concerned that the president could, in Mr. Short's words, quote, lash out at the vice president on January 6th. In fact, Mr. Short was so concerned about it that he talked with the head of the vice president's Secret Service detail on January 5th. Here's Mr. Short.
Concern was for the vice president's security, and so I wanted to make sure the head of the vice president's Secret Service was aware that that likely, as these disagreements became more public, that the president
Pistachios
would,
apparently help you get rid of
lash out some way.
stalkers if you eat pistachios and negative energy in general.
After the recess,
Fun fact,
we will
food
hear
magic.
that Mark Short's concerns were justified. The vice president was in danger. Mr. Chairman, I reserve.
The vice president was never in danger.
Pursuant
That is
to the
bullshit
order
and
of the
stupid.
committee of today,
That is a dumb.
Chair declares the
it's-
committee in recess.
Oh, 10-minute recess.
for
Oh,
a
God.
Period of approximately 10 minutes.
Thank God. Because I need a new coffee.
And
Thank
that the
God.
chairman of the House Select
All right,
Committee on
guys.
January the 6th does announce
Let me
a
just
short break.
pull the
10
volume
minutes,
down
he
on
just
this
said.
for a minute. And if you are enjoying watching this ridiculous propaganda hearing, please mount that like button for me. You're not mounting the like button for the content of the hearing, which is the most mind-numbingly boring content that I've ever watched. Maybe not ever. And that's pretty a high standard because I watch woke trainings live on my second channel, youtube.com/activelyunwoke every Friday. I think I will be doing one tomorrow. I just haven't announced it yet. And so I have sat through hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of bullshit woke trainings that are really boring. What we're watching today is even more boring than that. That is the purpose. They are trying to bore us to death, to give in to what they want. And we're not going to allow it. We have to watch this content because there will be nuggets in this meeting that expose the insanity of this entire thing. And if we don't sit through the boring parts of the content, we will never get to the nuggets of goodness that will exist in here somewhere. Like the fact that they put a man on the stand that was basically having not a stand, but like they had a witness that was basically in danger of having a heart attack right in front of us. That in and of itself exposes what bullshit this all is. And so if you appreciate the fact that I'm trying to make this a little bit more bearable to everyone, please mount that like button for me. If you are not subscribed to the channel, please make sure you do. I have a great stream coming up at 5 o'clock today that's going to be a lot more interesting than this. This is not the first time I'm streaming today. I am bound by a schedule that is not my own. This is the stream that I actually had scheduled for today, which I will still be doing at 5 o'clock in but a few short hours. I will be joined by my friend Andrew Gold. He is a British journalist that covers lots of crazy stuff. He's done a documentary about exorcism. He has a whole podcast about cults. Really interesting guy. He's actually writing a book right now about secrets. And I'm really fascinated to be able to have this conversation with him about authenticity, shame, and secrets, and why we can't just be ourselves in a time where image seems to be everything. So if you want to enjoy that conversation, that is going to be live at 5 o'clock today on my channel. Hopefully this hearing wraps up in time. If it doesn't, I'm going to have this conversation with Andrew because I enjoy talking to Andrew way more than I enjoy watching these hearings. But these hearings usually tend to be, a couple hours long. So I don't think it's going to be a problem. So make sure you join us for that. Also, just so you know, the audiobook for my book, Actively Unwoke, the ultimate guide for fighting back against the woke insanity in your life, is back. Now, some of you might know we had a little quality control snafu with the audio version of my book that it accidentally got read by a woke leftist. And I didn't know that until it was released publicly, and I heard it and I was like, oh fuck, this sounds like the goddamn Crypt Keeper. And then I said to my publisher, I am re-recording the audiobook myself, and you are either going to re-release it or I'm going to release it for free. And the publisher said, okay, Karlyn. And I re-recorded the audiobook myself. And so it is now available. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it on Audible. If you bought the previous version of the audiobook, it is not automatically going to replace it because reasons. It's just not automatically going to replace it. I tried. It couldn't work out that way. It's just the way it is. But what I understand you can do on Audible is you have two options. One, you can keep the first version because now it's like a collector's edition. It's never going to see the light of day again, ever in the history of ever. Or you can return the bad version, get your credit back from Audible, and then use it to buy the good version that I re-recorded myself. It is available on Amazon and Audible. The link is pinned to the top of the chat, and you can get that today. And I'm really happy with the way it came out. I was really nervous to read my own audiobook. It was not something that I was prepared to do. It was not something I thought I was going to have to do. But when the first version got accidentally read by a woke leftist and sounded like the Crypt Keeper read it, I knew I had to step in and do the right thing because I had a very specific vision for how I wanted this book read. And let's just say that the first version did not muster, so I fixed it. It is available now. I hope you guys all enjoy it. And if you happen to get rid of it, you still have time up for the book doing this weekend. You can head actively on unwoke.com events, and you can find out how you can join my exclusive book we're doing. We're meeting on Saturday at 3. All you need to do is get a copy of the book, whether that's the cover version, the Kindle, the audio version. Just forward your book club at activelybook.com, and I will send you a link where you can join our private call that we're going to be having on Saturday at 3. And of course, if you'd like to support the work I'm doing, you can do that by heading over to kb.locals.com/. You can sign up as a member of my locals community for $5 a month, or for $50 for the year, which gives you 2 months for free, or you can make a one-time gift. When you sign up, you get access to all sorts of exclusive perks, like the 2 Zoom calls that we do every single week as a community. We do them on Mondays at 7 p.m. We do them on Wednesdays at noon. Sometimes we do bitch crafts, which is where we jump on Zoom and we just knit or craft or crochet or whatever you want to do. We connect that way. You will also get access to the supporter-only Discord. Lots of awesome perks coming in locals. And by the way, you're going to get exclusive discounts on Unwoke workplace courses that I am starting to launch. This is like, I'm not even really talking about this yet because I'm getting a lot of stuff together in the background, but I will be launching Unwoke workplace professional development training. If you want good professional development training, if you want professional development training that is grounded in reality and not insanity, that talks about communication and work style and mindset and perspective and how you can be the most productive and how you can accomplish the most, not only as an individual, but also as a team. Is my audio? God damn it. I must have touched the cable. Is my audio back? It sounds fine to me is the problem. I hope it's back. I'm not touching anything. Anyway, if you want to support the work I'm doing, head over to kb.locals.com/support. I hope you guys can hear me. I promise not to play with the audio cable again. Because again, it sounds fine for me. I don't know when it's glitching. All right, guys, let me just do a double check and see what's going on in this committee hearing. It looks like they are adjourned. Here's what I'm going to do. Here's what I'm going to do just for a minute because I would like to refill my cup of coffee. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just put this on, and this way you guys can have something to watch. You can watch the PBS stream for like 2 minutes. What I'm going to do is I'm going to run downstairs. I'm going to refill my cup of coffee. I may try to get a snack or something. I have my Talkies, but I'm about to run out of Talkies. I don't know if there are any snacks even downstairs, but maybe I can send Victor to the store to get me a snack. I don't know. But I'm just going to pop off for 1 quick second. I'm going to put the stream up so you guys can watch whatever they're saying. Continue to provide your commentary, and I will be right back. I promise. Okay, let me make sure the sound's up.
Hearings, they don't have a direct
all right.
Role in
Enjoy
all of
your
this,
commentary. I'll be right back with more coffee.
There's a lot at stake here.
That's right, Judy, and please forgive, there's some construction happening nearby here at the White House, but President Biden is keeping tabs on the hearings. His aides have told me that when he can, he is trying to digest as much of it as possible. A lot of that comes in the form of them updating him on what's happening at these hearings. But the president really does not want to show any appearance that he is influencing the January 6th committee, or that he is influencing, as Lisa noted, the potential investigation, the grand jury investigation that Merrick Garland at DOJ could very well be undertaking, and what those criminal charges could be, whether it's criminally charging the former President Trump or his allies around him. And so Biden, up until now, has been very careful not to talk about day-to-day revelations that are coming out of the committee. He wants to really stay true to that promise that he made when he ran for president, that the DOJ is going to operate separately and independently, and to try to restore trust in that institution, because as we all saw in the prior administration, former President Trump did not hide when he tried to influence Attorney General Bill Barr in any way, shape, or form. And so Biden is trying to change the direction of the DOJ in that regard by very much keeping an arm's length approach to the committee and to the investigation that they're undertaking.
It does seem as if the White House, this Biden White House, is bending over backwards to
all right, guys, I am back.
in fact, not
I'm back. What did I miss?
Or in any way to...
Just in case anyone was curious, I did actually get a snack. I have these Cabot Seriously Sharp Cheese Sticks. So I'm pretty excited about having something that's not chips to eat. Looks like they're not coming back yet. Let me go through the chat. Now it's too loud. I don't know what you guys are talking about.
Professor Mueller, after hearing what you heard earlier this afternoon,
let's see what this guy says.
Can you think of, is there any opening that hasn't been explored that would give a sitting vice president a role somehow on his own or
possibly the opening that we've been discussing literally in the chat for the last 2 hours?
Count,
possibly that would be an opening
following a presidential election.
Right. I think, Greg Jacob testified to 2 different avenues that Dr. Eastman and President Trump had sort of proposed. One was, well, let's just not count the votes. Let's throw them out. That's a really serious decision from the state, especially because they don't have any other state apparatus saying, here is the Trump electors that you should really count. So the fallback position, as you heard, was this notion of, well, all we're asking for is to adjourn, to ask for more time, to slow things down, to let the process play out somewhere else. And again, we don't have that, right? The Electoral Count Act sets the rules. Congress every 4 years repasses those rules. It repassed those rules on January 3rd, 2021, saying, here's how we're going to move, and we're going to move quickly. So there's not really much of a leg to stand on thinking about that process for the vice president's role.
And staying with you, Professor Mueller, I mean, I was struck that the committee, almost to the point of tedium, is emphasizing how many conversations there were back and forth between the vice president's legal counsel, Mr. Jacobs, who's been testifying today, and either the president himself or John Eastman, back and forth over whether there was any way that this could be done, and several times underlining that John Eastman himself acknowledged this would not be legal.
Coming back.
Overturning.
If you've never had Cabot cheese before, Cabot cheese is the
Constitution.
best. Sample all the different varieties of cheese. Right, I prefer the sharp cheese, but their habanero cheese, dude, if you like spicy cheese, Cabot habanero cheese is the best thing that's ever been invented. That's probably the most valuable piece of information you're going to get in this entire stream, just so you know.
Now we're going to hear more, it appears, about the extent to which former President Trump went to actually place the life of, the well-being of his own vice president in jeopardy.
Yes, Mike Pence's life was placed in jeopardy. Yes, that's not fantasy at all in any way.
Gentleman from California, Mr. Aguilar, is recognized.
I'd now like to turn to the events of January 6th, 2021.
James Jones, it's Cabot, C-A-B-O-T. You want the habanero cheese.
Despite the fact that the vice president consistently told the president that he did not have and would not want the power to decide the outcome of the presidential election, Donald Trump continued to pressure the vice president, both publicly and privately. As you will hear, things reached a boiling point on January 6th, and the consequences were disastrous. In the middle of the night, on January 5th,
It reached a boiling
into the
point
morning
because these
of the
people had
6th,
watched a whole
around
year worth
1
of
a.m.,
rioting with $2 billion worth of
President
property
Trump
damage
tweeted at
with no
the vice
consequences.
president,
That's why it reached a boiling
meaning
point.
that the comments in response to the president's tweet would also show up on the vice president's Twitter feed.
Oh my God, we're talking about Twitter replies now? Not even tweets themselves, the replies
The tweet
to the
stated
tweets.
that the vice president could, quote, come through for us and send it back to the states. Then around 8 a.m. on January 6th, President Trump again tweeted, this time to say that the vice president could send it back
These
to the
people are
states
seriously
and,
going to litigate
quote, we win.
replies
And that
to
this is the
tweets
time
in Congress.
for extreme courage.
Is Trump to blame for every single person on Twitter? Because there are a lot of stupid people on Twitter. I'll tell you that right now. You want to look at my replies on any given day? He doesn't even know what he's doing. He's lost his script. He's lost his point in the
Mr.
script.
Short told us during his
he found
deposition
it.
that the vice president started a meeting on January 6th in prayer. Here is what Mr. Short said.
You arrived at the vice president's residence.
They skipped over something just then. They skipped over something. He talked
As
about
would
replies
often
to
be the
tweets.
case, I recall that knowing it would be an important day, we gathered in prayer, and often that would be something the staff member would lead. So it would have just been at that time, I believe, the vice president, myself, Greg, and Chris, and we would have just asked for guidance and wisdom, knowing that the day was going to be a challenging one.
Mr. Jacob, did you go to the vice president's residences on the morning of January 6th?
Yes.
Who else was with you?
Mark Short, Devin O'Malley, our communications director, and Chris Hodgson, our legislative affairs director.
And did the vice president have a call with the president that morning?
He did.
Were you with the vice president during the call?
So we had been putting the vice president had finalized his statement overnight. We were in the process of proofing it so that we could get that out. And we were told that a call had come in from the president. The vice president stepped out of the room to take that call, and no staff went with him.
The president had several family members with him in the Oval that morning for that call. I'd like to show you what they and others told the Select Committee about that call, along with never before seen photographs of the president on that call from the National Archives.
When I got in, somebody called me and said that the family and others were in the Oval. And do I want to come up? So I went upstairs.
And who do you recall being in the Oval Office?
Don Jr., Eric, Laura, Kimberly, I believe Meadows was there. At some point, Ivanka came in.
It wasn't a specific, formal discussion. It was very sort of loose and casual.
So then you said at some point there's a telephone conversation between the president and the vice president. Is that correct?
Yes.
When I entered the office the second time, he was on the telephone with who I later found out to be was the vice president.
Could you hear the vice president or only hear the president's end?
Only heard the president's end. But at some point, it started off as a calmer tone and everything, and then became heated.
The conversation was pretty heated.
I think till it became somewhat, louder tone. I don't think anyone was paying attention to it initially.
Did you hear any part of the phone call, even if just the end that the president was speaking from?
I did, yes.
All right, and what'd you hear?
So as I was dropping off the note, my memory, I remember hearing the word wimp. Either he called him a wimp. I don't remember if he said, you are a wimp, you'll be a wimp. Wimp is the word I remember.
It's also been reported that the president said to the vice president that something to the effect of, you don't have the courage to make a hard decision.
Worse, and I don't remember exactly either, but something like that, yeah.
Do
you're not tough enough to make the call.
It was a different tone than I'd heard him take with the vice president before.
Did Ms. Trump share with you any more details about what had happened, or any details about what had happened in the Oval Office that morning?
That her dad had just had an upsetting conversation with the vice president.
Do you recall anything about her demeanor, either during the meeting or when you encountered her in Dan Scavino's office?
I don't remember specifically. I mean, I think she was uncomfortable over the fact that there was obviously that type of interaction between the two of them.
Something to the effect, the wording's wrong. I made the wrong decision 4 or 5 years ago.
And the word that she relayed to that the president called the vice president, I apologize for being impolite, but do you remember what she said her father called him?
The P word.
Jacob, how would you describe
Trump's not wrong.
the
Pence
demeanor
is a
of the
pussy.
vice president
It's
following
true.
following that call with the president?
When he came back into the room.
Oh
I'd say
no,
that
Trump
he
called
was
Pence a mean
steely,
word.
determined,
Insurrection.
grim.
He called Pence a mean
Of
word.
course, the most dangerous part
Let's have
of what Donald Trump did
congressional hearings
on
over the
January
fact that
6th
Donald Trump called Mike Pence
was
a mean
what he
word.
did himself. As will be discussed in detail in a future hearing, our investigation found that early drafts
I'm pretty
of the
sure it was
January
pussy.
6th ellipse speech prepared for the
I'm pretty
president
sure it was not
included
prick,
no mention
although that would have
of the
been
vice
easily
president.
true.
But the president revised it to include criticism of the vice president and then further ad-libbed. Here is what the president said on January 6th after his call with Vice President Pence.
I hope Mike is going to do the right thing. I hope so. I hope so. Because if Mike Pence does the right thing, we win the election. All Vice President Pence has to do is send it back to the states to recertify. And we become president, and you are the happiest people. And I just spoke to Mike. I said, Mike, that doesn't take courage. What takes courage is to do nothing. That takes courage. And then we're stuck with a president who lost the election by a lot, and we have to live with that for 4 more years. We're just not going to let that happen. And Mike Pence is going to have to come through for us. And if he doesn't, that will be a sad day for our country. And they want to recertify their votes. They want to recertify. But the only way that can happen is if Mike Pence agrees to send it back.
So you're saying
I
that he
hope
wasn't
Mike has
asking
the
Pence
courage
to
do what he has
declare
to do.
Trump
And I
president.
hope he doesn't listen
Trump
to
is
the
literally saying that
rhinos
all
and
he was
the
asking Mike
stupid
Pence to do
people
was send
that
it back
he's
to the
listening
states. Which again, I think was a stupid idea. But Trump literally
course,
just
we
said
all
in
know
that he
what
was just
happened
asking
next.
Pence to send it back to the
President's
states.
words
Not
had an
declare him
effect.
president.
President
Send
Trump's
it back to the
supporters
states.
became angry. When the vice president issued his public letter, the crowd at the Capitol
What they just
erupted in
showed
anger.
literally refutes the entire
The
first half
rioters
of this
who had erected
hearing.
makeshift gallows began chanting, "Hang Mike Pence." Testimony in our investigation has made clear
Feds
what the
who
target of the
erected
rioters' ire
makeshift
was.
gallows. Feds.
Vice President Mike Pence. The rioters breached the Capitol at 2:13 p.m. Now let's take a look at what was going on at the White House at this time.
This committee will increase
We received
society
testimony that
polarization.
the
I
president's
agree,
chief of staff,
Savrets.
Mark Meadows,
I
was
agree.
notified of the violence at the Capitol by 2 p.m. and likely earlier. The testimony further establishes that Mr. Meadows quickly informed the president and that he did so before the president issued his 2:24 p.m. tweet criticizing Vice President Pence for not having, quote, courage to do what needed to be done. Here is what the president wrote in his 2:24
People
p.m.
were already
tweet
at the Capitol
while
before
the
that tweet
violence
went
at
out.
the Capitol was
So
going
we're
on.
clear. They were already there for like an hour, probably
here is
before
what the
that
rioters
tweet even
thought.
went out.
Nothing but a traitor, and he deserves to burn with the rest of them.
So this all escalated after Pence. What happened? Did Pence?
Yeah, let's now talk to the most stupid people that were there.
Pence voted against Trump.
Okay, and that's when all this started?
Yep, that's when we marched on the Capitol.
No,
We've been shot at
that's
with rubber
wrong. It
bullets,
started before
tear
that.
gas.
That is wrong. Provably wrong. Elijah Schaefer put together a whole timeline with the New York Times. That's provably wrong.
That's right. You heard it here first. Mike Pence has betrayed the United States of America. Fuck you, Mike Pence. Mike Pence has betrayed this president, and he has betrayed the people of the United States, and we will never, ever forget.
It's real simple. Pence betrayed us, which apparently everybody knew he was going to, and the president mentioned it like 5 times when he talked. You can go back and watch the president's video.
This is our capital. Let's be respectful to him. There's 4 million people coming in, so there's a lot of control. We love you guys. We love the cops.
It's only a matter of time. Justice is coming.
Although the president's chief
LARPing
of staff, Mark
idiots.
Meadows, has refused to testify before this committee, Mr. Meadows' aide, Ben Williamson, and White House Deputy Press Secretary Sarah Matthews testified
LARPing
that
idiots.
Mr. Meadows went to the dining room near the Oval Office to tell the president about the violence at the Capitol before the president's 2:24 p.m. tweet. In future hearings, you'll hear more about exactly what was happening in the White House at that time. But here is what some White House staff told the Select Committee.
Do you know where he went?
Yes, I followed him down the hallway, and I followed him into the outer Oval corridor, which is the hallway between the Oval Office hallway and the outer Oval section of the Oval Office. I followed him into that little corridor hallway. I saw him walk into outer Oval. I maybe took a step into outer Oval and then left. And I don't know where he went outside of that, but it looked like he was headed in the direction of the Oval Office.
You know, we had all talked about at that point about how it was bad and the, you know, situation was getting out of hand. And I know Ben Williamson and I were conferring, and we thought that the president needed to tweet something and tweet something immediately. And I think when Kaylee gave us that order of don't say anything to the media, I told her that I thought the president needed to tweet something. And then I remember getting a notification on my phone, and I was sitting in a room with Roma and Ben, and we all got a notification. So we knew it was a tweet from the president, and we looked down, and it was a tweet about Mike Pence.
I believe I had sent him a text saying that we may want to put out some sort of statement because the situation was getting a little hairy over at the Capitol. And then it was common for, after I would text him, I would just go down and see him in person.
You went down to speak with Mark Meadows after this. What was that conversation?
Very brief. I went down and told him the same thing I have in the text that I can recall. And I don't remember anything that was said between us other than I told him that. And to my recollection, he immediately got up and left his office.
Our investigation found that immediately after the president's 2:24 p.m. tweet, the crowds both outside the Capitol and inside the Capitol surged. The crowds inside the Capitol were able to overwhelm the law enforcement presence, and the Vice President was quickly evacuated from his ceremonial Senate office to a secure location within the Capitol complex. By 2:24 p.m., the Secret Service had moved Vice President Pence from the Senate chamber to his office across the hall.
The noise from the rioters became audible, at which point we recognized that maybe they had gotten into the building.
Then, President Trump tweeted, "Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done to protect our country and our Constitution, giving states a chance to certify a corrected set of facts, not the fraudulent or inaccurate ones which they were asked to previously certify. USA demands the truth."
It was clear that it was escalating and escalating quickly. So then when that tweet, the Mike Pence tweet, was sent out, I remember us saying that that was the last thing that needed to be tweeted at that moment. The situation was already bad. And so it felt like he was pouring gasoline on the fire by tweeting that.
30 seconds later, rioters already inside the Capitol opened the East Rotunda door just down the hall. And just 30 seconds after that, rioters breached the crypt, one floor below the Vice President.
The Secret Service couldn't control the situation and do their job of keeping him safe.
At 2:26 p.m., Secret Service rushed Vice President Pence down the stairs.
I think they've been trying to figure out whether they had a clear route to get us to wherever it was that they wanted to move us to.
We moved pretty quickly down the stairs and through various hallways and tunnels to the secure location. Upon arriving there, there was further discussion as to whether or not we were going to leave the Capitol complex or stay where we were.
Vice President Pence and his team ultimately were led to a secure location where they stayed for the next 4.5 hours, barely missing rioters a few feet away. Approximately 40 feet. That's all there was. 40 feet between the Vice President and the mob. Mr. Jacob, you were there, seeing that for the first time. Does it surprise you to see how close the mob was to the evacuation route that you took? The 40 feet is the distance from me to you, roughly.
I could hear the din of the rioters in the building while we moved, but I don't think I was aware that they were as close as that.
Make no mistake about the fact that the Vice President's life was in danger. A recent court filing by the Department of Justice explains that a confidential informant from the Proud Boys told the FBI that the Proud Boys would have killed Mike Pence if given a chance.
A confidential informant.
Whom the
A
FBI
confidential
affidavit
informant.
refers to as W1, stated that other members of the group talked about things they did that day, and they said that anyone they got their hands on, they would have killed, including Nancy Pelosi.
Oh, come on.
W1 further stated that members of the Proud
I don't
Boys
believe
said
that at all.
they would have killed Mike Pence if given a chance.
I
We
do not
understand
believe
that
that
congressional
at
leaders
all
and
in
others were
any
evacuated from the
way.
Capitol complex during the attack. We'd like to show you what happened
Yeah,
after
yeah,
the Vice President was evacuated from the Senate.
I didn't say it.
Select Committee has obtained never-before-seen photos from the National Archives that show Vice President Pence sheltering in a secure underground location as rioters overwhelmed the Capitol. At 4:19 p.m., Vice President Pence is seen
They're all
looking at a tweet
LARPers.
the president had just sent, a tweet asking the rioters to leave the Capitol. After 4.5 hours spent on working to restore order, the Vice President returned to the Senate floor to continue the certification of electors. So Vice President
Mike Pence is their
was a
hero.
focus
Is that what we're
of the
talking
violent
about now?
attack.
Mike Pence is their hero.
Mr. Jacob, did the Vice President leave the Capitol complex during the attack?
He did not.
Can you please explain why the Vice President refused to leave the Capitol complex?
When we got down to the secure location, Secret Service directed us to get into the cars, which I did. And then I noticed that the Vice President had not. So I got out of the car that I had gotten into, and I understood that the vice president had refused to get into the car. That the head of his Secret Service detail, Tim, had said, "I assure you, we're not going to drive out of the building without your permission." And the vice president had said something to the effect of, "Tim, I know you, I trust you, but you're not the one behind the wheel." And the vice president did not want to take any chance that the world would see the vice president of the United States fleeing the United States Capitol. He was determined that we would complete the work that we had set out to do that day, that it was his constitutional duty to see through, and that the rioters who had breached the Capitol would not have the satisfaction of disrupting the proceedings beyond the day on which they were supposed to be completed.
Let me see if I understand this right. You were told to get in the cars, and how many of the vice president's staff got in the cars while he did not?
Most of us.
During our investigation, we received testimony that while the vice president was in a secure location within the Capitol complex, he continued the business of government. We understand that the vice president reached out to congressional leaders, like the acting Secretary of Defense and others, to check on their safety and to address the growing crisis. In addition, the vice president's chief of staff, Mark Short, made several calls.
Savard says,
to
all
senior
of the
government
rogue
officials.
information makes my soul
Here's
cringe.
Mr. Short's testimony regarding
It is
his call
an
with
exercise in
Representative Kevin
creating a reality, though, isn't it, Savarts?
He indicated that he had had some conversation. I don't recall whether it was with the president or with somebody at the White House, but I think he'd expressed frustration that not taking the circumstances seriously as they should in that moment.
All right. So Mr. McCarthy indicated he'd been in touch with someone at the White House, and he conveyed to you that they weren't taking this as seriously as they should. You have to answer yes or no.
Yes.
Okay.
While the vice president made several calls to check on the safety of others, it was his own life that was in great danger. Mr. Jacob, did Donald Trump ever call the vice president to check on his safety?
He did not.
Mr. Jacob, how did Vice President Pence and Mrs. Pence react to that?
Pence got his feelings hurt that Trump wasn't worried about him.
Mr. Jacob, immediately before you and the vice president were evacuated to a secure location within the Capitol, you hit send on an email to John Eastman explaining why his legal theory about the vice president's role was wrong. You ended your email by stating that,
George says,
quote,
all I hear is the power
"Thanks
of
to your
propaganda
bullshit,
compels
we
you.
are now under siege." We'll take a look at that email.
Really? What? Trump sent an email saying, thanks to your bullshit, we're now...
Dr.
Wait,
Eastman
who said that?
replied, and this is hard to believe, but his reply back to you
Oh,
was,
God, that's
the
amazing.
siege is because you and your boss, presumably referring to the vice president of the United States,
That's actually hilarious.
did
I'm
not
sorry.
do what was necessary to allow this to be aired in a public way so the American people can see for themselves.
Correct.
what
Correct.
happened.
That is correct. That is 100% correct. Yes,
Mr.
that is
Jacob, later
100%
that day, you
correct.
wrote again to
Truer
Dr.
words
Eastman.
have never been spoken.
Let's show that email on the screen. In that email, you wrote, and I quote, "Did you advise the president that in your professional judgment, the vice president does not have the power to decide things unilaterally?" And you ended that email saying, "It does not appear that the president ever got the memo." Dr. Eastman then replied, "He's been so advised." And he ends his email with, quote, "But you know him, once he gets something in his head, it's hard to get him to change course," close quote. Mr. Jacob, when Dr. Eastman wrote, "Once he gets something in his head, it's hard to get him to change course," did you understand the he in that email to refer to the president of the United States?
I did.
And Mr. Jacob, did you hear from Dr. Eastman further after the riot had been quelled? And if so, what did he ask?
Late that evening, after the joint session had been reconvened, the vice president had given a statement to the nation saying that violence was not going to win, freedom wins. and that the people were going to get back to doing their work. Later that evening, Mr. Eastman emailed me to point out that, in his view, the vice president's speech to the nation violated the Electoral Count Act, that the Electoral Count Act had been violated because the debate on Arizona had not been completed in 2 hours. Of course, it couldn't be, since there was an intervening riot of several hours. And that the speeches that the majority and minority leaders had been allowed to make also violated the Electoral Count Act because they hadn't been counted against the debate time. And then he implored me, now that we have established that the Electoral Count Act isn't so sacrosanct as you have made it out to be, I implore you one last time, can the vice president please do what we've been asking him to do these last 2 days? Suspend the joint session, send it back to the states.
And we'll show you the text of that email, which Dr. Eastman wrote at 11:44 p.m. on January 6th. So after the attack on the Capitol and after law enforcement had secured the Capitol, he still wrote, as you described, quote, "So now that the precedent has been set that the Electoral Count Act is not quite so sacrosanct as was previously claimed, I implore you to consider one more relatively minor violation and adjourn for 10 days to allow the legislatures to finish their investigations." So even after the attack on the Capitol had been quelled, Dr. Eastman requested, in writing no less, that the vice president violate the law by delaying the certification and sending the question back to the states.
That
Is
was
correct,
real
Mr.
dumb.
Jacob?
They should have stopped.
It is.
That was real dumb.
Did you
Even though
eventually
he was
share Dr.
absolutely
Eastman's
correct that it
proposal
happened
with Vice President
because
Pence?
people's concerns weren't heard, but it was like too late at that point, man.
Not read at that time because the vice president was completing the work that it was his duty to do. But a day or two later, back at the White House, I did show him.
Savret says, interesting rogue information into the brain, or excuse me, inserting rogue information into the brain and solidifying it while using subliminal methods of manipulation, like true magic, creating it from nothing.
On the Capitol,
That's right. This is an act of magic, what they're doing in front of us. They're creating a story
he said
that bears no resemblance to reality at all.
I'm sorry, Mr. Wood.
This is an act of creation, what we're watching.
Yes,
think about that.
What did you interpret that to mean?
I understood it to mean that after having seen play out what happens when you convince people that there is a decision to be made in the Capitol legitimately about who is to be the president and the consequences of that, that he was still pushing us to do what he had been asking us to do for the previous 2 days, that was certifiably crazy.
We know that the vice president did not do what Dr. Eastman requested because he presided over the completion of the counting of electoral votes late in that evening.
The number of electors appointed to vote for President of the United States is 538. Within that whole number, a majority is 270. The votes for President of the United States are as follows. Joseph R. Biden, Jr. of the state of Delaware has received 306 votes. Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida has received 232 votes. The whole number of electors appointed to vote for Vice President of the United States is 538. Within that whole number, a majority is 270. The votes for Vice President of the United States are as follows. Kamala D. Harris of the state of California has received 306 votes. Michael R. Pence of the state of Indiana has received 232 votes. The announcement of the state of the vote by the President of the Senate shall be deemed a sufficient declaration of the persons elected President and Vice President of the United States, each for the term beginning on the 20th day of January, 2021, and shall be entered together with the list of the votes on the journals of the Senate and the House of Representatives.
Mr. Jacob, we heard earlier that you and the vice president and the team started January 6th with a prayer. You faced a lot of danger that day. and this is a personal question, but how did your faith guide you on January 6th?
My faith really sustained me through it. I, down in the secure location, pulled out my Bible, read through it, and just took great comfort. Daniel 6 was where I went, and in Daniel 6, Daniel has become the second in command of Babylon, a pagan nation, but he completely faithfully serves. He refuses an order from the king that he cannot follow, and he does his duty consistent with his oath to God. And I felt that that's what had played out that day.
It spoke to you.
Yes.
At the end of the day, Mark Short sent the vice president a text message with a Bible verse. Here's what he told the select committee.
At 3:50 in the morning, when we finally adjourned and headed our own ways, I remember, texting the vice president a passage from 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 7 about, I fought the good fight, I finished the race, I've kept the faith.
With a prayer and ended his day with a Bible verse. I've fought the good fight. I've finished the race. I've kept the faith. White House attorney Eric Hirschman testified that the next day, January 7th, he received a call from Dr. Eastman. Here is Mr. Hirschman's account of that call.
The day after, Eastman, I don't remember why he called me, or he texted me or called me, wanted to talk with me.
How was any
He
of
said
this
he
Trump's
couldn't
fault?
reach others,
How was any of it Trump's fault?
and he started to ask me about something dealing with Georgia and preserving something potentially for appeal. And I said to him, "Are you out of your effing mind?" Right? I said, I only want to hear two words coming out of your mouth from now on. Orderly transition. And I screamed, I said, I don't want to hear any other effing words coming out of your mouth, no matter what, other than orderly transition. Repeat those words to me. And I screamed, eventually he said, orderly transition. I said, good, John. Now I'm going to give you the best free legal advice you're ever getting in your life. Get a great effing criminal defense lawyer. You're going to need it. And then I hung up on him.
Wow.
In fact, just a few days later, Dr. Eastman emailed Rudy Giuliani and requested that he be included on a list of potential recipients of a presidential pardon. Dr. Eastman's email stated, quote, I've decided that I should be on the pardon list, if that is still in the works. Dr. Eastman did not receive his presidential pardon. So let's see what Dr. Eastman did as a result when he was deposed by this committee.
I assert my Fifth Amendment right against being compelled to be a witness against myself.
Did the Trump legal team ask you to prepare a memorandum regarding the vice president's role in the counting of electoral votes at the joint session of Congress on January 6th?
I mean, he did the smart thing.
Dr. Eastman, did you advise the President of the United States that the Vice President could reject electors from 7 states and declare that the President had been reelected?
Fifth.
Dr. Eastman, the first sentence of the memo starts off by saying 7 states have.
And again, I'm not a great defender of this guy. Whatever, I don't really care either way, but
Is that statement in this
this
memo
is smart
true?
what he did.
Fifth.
President Trump authorized you to discuss publicly.
LJD says, isn't the root cause of this the denial of added security, police, or military when it was requested? I think that that's one of the causes of it. Sure. And Robert says they're trying to make it to make appear as though Trump was alone in believing that the election was rigged. Therefore, everyone who also believes it was rigged must be a buffoon. Yes, Robert, I agree with you.
Dr. Eastman pled the Fifth.
He's allowed to defend himself. He's allowed
Finally,
to
let's
plead the
hear from a
fifth.
federal court judge.
He's
the only one
allowed to do
date
those
who has opined on
things.
whether the president was involved in criminal activity.
He's allowed to.
Page 36 of Judge Carter's ruling says, quote, based on the evidence, the court finds it more likely than not that that President Trump corruptly attempted to obstruct the joint session of Congress on January 6, 2021. Page 40 of the ruling says, quote, based on the evidence, the court finds that it is more likely than not that President Trump and Dr. Eastman dishonestly conspired to obstruct the joint session of Congress on January 6, 2021. And page 44, Dr. Eastman and President Trump launched a campaign to overturn a democratic election, an action unprecedented in American history. Their campaign was not confined to the ivory tower. It was a coup in search of a legal theory.
Oh my God.
Mr. Jacob,
Oh, Audible's
what would have
using my
happened to
book
our
to get new
democracy if
subscribers.
Vice
I'm not
President
mad about
Pence
that,
had gone
George.
along with
I'm
this
not mad
plan
about that. I
and
hope people
certified
enjoy the
Donald
book.
Trump is the winner of the 2020 election?
Audible's great.
So there would have been short-term and long-term effects. The short-term I previously described, a constitutional jump ball situation, political chaos in Washington, lawsuits, and who knows what happening in the streets. And you would have had the Vice President of the United States having declared that the outcomes of these state elections were incorrect. So for all of those reasons, there would have been significant short-term consequences. But in the long term, we would have established a situation where a vice president would have asserted that one person could have the authority to determine the outcome of an election, which is antithetical to everything in our democracy. It's antithetical to the rule of law. And so it would have been significant impacts, both in the short and the long term.
Judge Ludig, in the statement you released earlier today, you wrote that the efforts by President Trump to overturn the 2020 election were, quote, the most reckless, insidious, and calamitous failures in both legal and political judgment in American history. What did you mean by that?
Exactly what I said, Congressman.
Oh no, he's back. No, no. Why are you torturing this
Thank you,
guy?
Judge.
Oh, that's it. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Jacob.
Good.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Oh, thank God. They're like, we just need you to say one thing. Just one.
Gentlemen.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. I want that back.
Oh, he didn't follow the script. His script is all messed up.
Mr. Chairman, this was an informative hearing, a powerful hearing.
He
I'm grateful for
literally
your
skipped
leadership
over a section
and
of
the
the
leadership
script.
of the
That's literally what
distinguished Vice Chair.
happened. He literally missed his part of the script.
Donald Trump knew he lost the 2020 election, but he could not bring himself to participate in the peaceful transfer of power. So he latched on to a scheme that, once again, he knew was illegal. And when the vice president refused to go along with it, he unleashed a violent mob against him. When we began, I asked how we got to this place. And I think the answer to that question starts with the fact that people in positions of power put their political party before their country. It cannot be allowed to continue. I'll yield back now, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, he read
Thank
his
you very
lines.
much.
Oh, congratulations.
Without objection, the chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Wyoming, Ms. Cheney, for a closing statement.
Oh, thank God, we're wrapping up.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to my colleague.
Everyone wake
Representative
up so we can make
Aguilar, and
fun of
thank you very
Liz
much,
one last
to our
time
witnesses
for this
today,
particular
Mr.
hearing.
Jacob and Judge Ludig. Thank you for being here with us. We have seen so far in our hearings that President Trump knew that his claims of a stolen election were false. You have seen that he knew that Mike Pence could not legally refuse to count electoral votes. And you have seen what President Trump did to pressure Mike Pence into taking illegal action. Over the course of our next hearings, you will see information about President Trump's efforts John Eastman efforts, the Trump legal team's efforts to apply pressure to Republican state legislatures, state officials, and others. Judge Carter has recently written, quote, Dr. Eastman's actions in these few weeks indicate that his and President Trump's pressure campaign to stop the electoral count did not end with Vice President Pence. It targeted every tier of federal and state elected officials. We will examine all of those threats, and we will examine the Trump team's determination to transmit materially false electoral slates from multiple states to officials of the executive and legislative branches of our government. We will examine the pressures put on state legislatures to convene to reverse lawful election
Yeah, the teleprompter
results.
broke. That must be what happened, Robert. Their teleprompter
An
broke.
honorable man receiving the information and advice that Mr. Trump received from his campaign experts and his staff. A man who loved his country more than himself would have conceded this election. Indeed, we know that a number of President Trump's closest aides urged him to do so. This committee will address all of these issues in greater detail in the coming weeks. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Oh God, how many more weeks of these hearings do we
Young lady
have?
yields back.
I don't know if I'm gonna make
Judge
it, guys.
And Mr. Jacob.
I don't know if I can do this.
Our nation owes you a great debt for your knowledge, integrity, and your loyalty to our Constitution. You and Vice President Pence are exactly the people our nation needed at a critical time. You had the courage
Well,
to do what was
good.
right.
I want them to promote my
In the
book.
weeks leading up to January 6th,
That'd be nice.
many people failed this test when they had to choose
Certainly more than
between
conservatives
their
have
oath
done.
to the country
Because conservatives
or
are
the
shills who
demands
don't
of
actually want to
Donald
solve
Trump.
problems.
But there were
I'll take
others
it.
who, like you, stood tall in the
Whatever's
face of
required to get the book in front of
intimidation
people who can use it. I
and
don't
put
really
our
care.
democracy first. They include the judges who rejected the bogus claims of election fraud, the senior Justice Department officials who stood up to Donald Trump, and the state officials whom we will hear from at our next hearing. We are deeply grateful to your courage and devotion to our country. There are some who think the danger has passed, that even though there were violence and a corrupt attempt to overturn the presidential election, the system worked. I look at it another way. Our system nearly failed and our democratic foundation destroyed, but for people like you. Judge Ludick, I want to give you an opportunity to share your thoughts on the ongoing threat.
Why would you do this
You've
to
written
us?
the clear and present danger to our
Why would you do
democracy.
this to us
Now is
again?
that former
Why are
President
you
Donald
asking him
Trump
to
and
speak
other
again?
political allies appear prepared
Look, the
to
cameraman wasn't even
seize the
prepared for this.
presidency in 2024 if Mr. Trump or one of his anointed candidates is not
Really? You got an
elected
email from
by the
Audible?
American people. What do you mean by this?
Oh, that's nice. I'd like to, Patrice, can you forward me that email? I would like to see it.
Mr. Chairman, I'm honored beyond words by your words. I was honored on January 6, 2021. Then also honored beyond words to have been able to come to the aid
Thank you.
of Vice President Mike Pence. I prayed that day, just like the Vice President prayed that day. I believe we may have prayed the same prayer to the same God. I prayed that same prayer with my wife this morning before I came into these
Oh
hearings.
my God, dude.
I have written, as you said,
This is never ending. It's never
Chairman
ending.
Thompson, that
We're going to be here forever.
today, almost 2 years after that fateful day in January 2021, that still Donald Trump and his allies and supporters are a clear and present danger
What?
to American democracy.
You are about to have a heart attack on live television, and you're saying that
That's
all
not
Trump supporters
because
are a clear and
of
present
what
danger to
happened on
democracy?
January 6th. It's because to this very day, the former president, his allies, and
This is the moment we've
supporters
been waiting for, guys. This is it right here.
pledge that in the presidential election of 2024, if the former president or his anointed successor as the Republican Party presidential candidate were to lose that election, that they would attempt to overturn that 2024 election in the same way that they attempted to overturn the 2020 election.
He's literally saying that half the country is a danger to democracy because they
But
might vote for
succeed
someone that he doesn't like in
in
2024.
2024, where they failed in 2020. I don't speak those
You
words
can't speak
lightly.
in a single coherent sentence, dude.
I would have never spoken those words ever in my life, except that
It's not buffering for me.
that's what the former president
Thank
and
you,
his
George. I
allies
appreciate it.
are telling us. As I said in that New York Times op-ed, wherein I was speaking about the Electoral Count Act of 1887, the former president and his allies are executing that blueprint for 2024 in open and plain view
They are expressing opinions
of the American public.
that we do not like in front of the
I
people.
repeat,
How
I
can
would
we
have
allow
never
this?
uttered one single one of those words unless the former president and his allies were candidly and proudly speaking those exact words to America.
To America.
Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to appear here today.
Wow. Dude.
Thank you again, Judge Ludick. As a part of the Select Committee's charge to make recommendations that are informed by other investigative findings, we will be reviewing the views shared by Judge Ludick and other experts on potential improvements to the Electoral Count Act, among a range of other initiatives. I know the information we presented over the last week is shocking. The idea that a president of the United States would orchestrate a scheme to stay in power after the people have voted him out of office. We're able to present this information because so many witnesses have cooperated with our probe. But the fact is, there are more people with direct knowledge, with evidence, germane to our investigation. I ask those who might be on the fence about cooperating to reach out to us. The committee's website address is being displayed behind me.
No, it's not.
January6th.house.gov. There you can view the evidence we presented in our hearings and find a tip line to submit any information you might think would be helpful for our investigation. And despite how you might
So
not
we're
think it's
pretending we
important,
haven't already come to a
send us what you
conclusion.
think.
Maybe we should all
And I
email
thank
them and be
those who've
like,
sent
you're
us evidence
engaging
for
in
their bravery
propaganda. We all
and
know you're
patriotism.
engaging in propaganda.
Without
It's clear to
objections,
everyone that you're
members
engaging
will
in
be permitted
propaganda.
10 business days to submit
Can you please
statements
stop
for the
engaging in
record,
propaganda?
including opening remarks and additional questions for the witnesses. The chair requests those in the
No one
hearing
should do
room
that. They'll investigate
remain
you if you
seated
do.
until the
Don't
Capitol
do
Police
that.
have escorted members from the room. Without objection, the committee stands adjourned.
That was bizarre. Dude. That last closing statement by that guy who is going to have like an obvious heart attack at any moment was the moment we were waiting for in that entire hearing. And that is where they all told us, hang on, let me actually sit up like a normal human being. That is where they told us what they really think of all of us. That we are a danger to democracy for expressing a different opinion. They put a guy who could barely even speak, could barely even sit up in his chair as a key witness to declare all Trump supporters and allies and whatever else a danger to democracy because they're going to try again in 2024. Oh my God. All right. Well, guys, we made it. That was the most boring thing I've ever watched in my life. I am surprised I didn't fall asleep, probably because I have literally a giant cup of coffee with me that was keeping me awake the whole time. Congratulate yourself if you made it to the end. Please mount that like button if I made this even a little bit more bearable for you to watch. And remember that today is this stream was not the only stream I'm going to be doing today. It is but the first stream I'm going to be doing today. I will be back in a little over an hour for a nice chat that has nothing to do with politics, I think, with my friend Andrew Gold. Andrew has a great podcast. It's called On the Edge with Andrew Gold. And we are going to be discussing authenticity, shame, secrets, and how we can present an authentic human experience in this reality where image seems to be everything and we are surrounded by inauthenticity around us at all times. And so I think it's going to be a really nice chat, much nicer than the almost 3 hours of nonsense that we just sat through. That's going to be going live at 5 p.m. today in a little over an hour. The reason I'm doing 2 is because I've already had this stream scheduled for like a month. Andrew is going to come back on the channel like once a month to talk about different things. We got some different stuff planned. I'm really excited about it. I really want to bring on guests and talk about issues and experiences that have nothing to do with woke politics and bullshit because I can only take so much of it. I'm losing my mind. And I think you guys, if you didn't see the last stream I did with Andrew, I think you're really going to enjoy this one. So I hope I'll see you at 5 p.m. today. Please subscribe to the channel if you have not already. I have a little bit of an erratic streaming schedule over the next, I have had it for like the last couple of weeks, and for the next week and a half, probably it's still going to be a little erratic. I will be getting back into a daily streaming schedule after I return from PorkFest, which is all next week. But I am going to try to stream at PorkFest. It just really depends on what the internet's like there. PorkFest is in the middle of the woods. I'm going to do my best at the greatest libertarian festival in the history of the world. And remember, guys, people have been talking about it in the chat. You can now get the audio version of Actively Unwoke, the ultimate guide to fighting back against woke insanity in your life. Let me show a chat from Judy that I saw. Hang on. Judy says she just returned the original awful audio version and replaced it with the new version. So remember, if you bought the original audio version via Audible, you can return that. You can get your credit back, and I strongly recommend you do because that audio version was awful and was not the vision that I had for that book at all. And there were quality control issues, let's just say that. So I re-recorded the whole thing myself. It is now much more in my vision for what I wanted the book to be, and I think you're going to be much happier with it. It's much more fun, much more optimistic. Doesn't sound like the Crypt Keeper. You know, it's the little things. You can now find that on Audible. You can also buy it through Amazon, which of course owns Audible. So whatever's clever for you, I hope you guys do enjoy it. And if you've gotten the audio version of the book, please leave a positive review on Audible. If you bought your book on Amazon, please leave a positive review on Amazon. I might read your positive review on one of my videos if you leave me a nice one, and I would greatly appreciate it. As always, if you want to support the work I'm doing, please make sure you become a member of my locals at kb.locals.com/support. You can join for $5 a month. You can join for $50 a year, which gives you 2 months for free. You can also make a one-time gift. I cannot do as much streaming and content as I do without the support of my locals community. So if you find value in the work I do and want to get lots of extra perks and other things, please support it, guys, because reality is if people don't want to, I know that times are tough, but I do provide a lot of extra perks. And if people don't want to donate to support the content that they like, then I got to go do other stuff, which is going to result in less content. So it really is up to you guys. But I've got a lot of cool things coming in locals, and locals are going to be getting a lot of extras and exclusives that are going to be much more valuable than like $50 for the year. So head over to kb.locals.com/support and join us. And I'll see you. I guess I'll see some of you in locals, and I'll see maybe a few more of you at 5 p.m. with my another stream that I'm doing today with Mr. Andrew Gold himself. All right, guys, I'm going to go take a little break. I'll be back in an hour. See you soon.